From one of the most luxurious royal palaces, suddenly there was a powerful explosion. It was so strong that the little girl was thrown aside by the blast wave, and all the objects around her fell to the floor. Sitting in confusion, the little girl did not understand how it could happen and what exactly she did wrong. She had a thought that she could have put a tainted night butterfly flower in the potion, which led to such consequences. A moment later, the door to the room she was in swung open and a handsome young prince appeared in the opening. The young man immediately asked her what had happened because the girl assured him that it was a very simple potion and it was easy to prepare, so why did he hear the sound of an explosion? The little girl immediately began to laugh nervously and tried to quickly put everything in its place as if nothing had happened. After that, she handed the man a small vial with a yellowish liquid and informed him that the potion he needed was ready. The young man looked at it with disbelief and decided to clarify whether it would definitely work as an antidote. The girl confidently exclaimed that, of course, it was with it that the Lord would definitely be able to awaken the saint. The woman the young man was worried about was called Asta Abel. Everyone considered her a saint and a miracle worker. She was always liked by everyone around her and had many admirers. A few days ago, the girl attended a tea party, after which she felt very bad and fainted. Many people came to the conclusion that someone dared her to put poison in her tea and poison her. No one knew how she could be helped or cured. One could only wonder what kind of poison the intruders had used and what might be suitable as an antidote. The most devoted admirer of this girl was the first Prince Hart von Reinhardt, who was most worried about her and tried to help as soon as possible. He threw all his forces to search throughout the vast empire in order to find a man who is able to cure her. After a while, they finally came across one who claimed to be able to save the saint. The young man looked at this little girl and could not believe that she was really able to help, so he warned her that if what he had been told was an insolent lie, she could kiss her life goodbye immediately. Then he asked her again if she was sure she could save Asta. The little girl looked at him with wide-open eyes and confidently answered that she was. She was the one who knew the necessary cure. The Lord did not believe her words and in a dismissive manner told his subordinates to get it out of his sight and pointed his finger at the girl, who was taken aback by such treatment. She was determined to prove to the young man that she could really save Saint Asta, so she clung to his pant leg and begged him to believe her words. With her body pressed against his leg, the girl continued to assure him that she was the only one who knew Carlin's method that would help. She thought to herself that it was because she had read a novel called The Returned Villain Dreams of a Happy Ending. In this book, the main character's name is Asta Abel. There it was told that the Holy Princess was deliberately transferred to another dimension, and afterward she returned to take revenge on all the intruders who dared to do this to her. The first Prince Hart von Reinhardt in it was a minor character who harbored tender feelings for Asta and was her most devoted admirer. As soon as the little girl saw the first image of him, he immediately became her most favorite character, and she remembered in detail every chapter where his name was mentioned. The girl thought about the fact that she would never have the chance to meet him again, so she should never miss such a moment now. Out loud, however, she shouted out loud that her mom was the best doctor ever. She also told her that the headache that always torments the prince so much could be cured. The young man was interested in this information. He quickly sat down on one knee beside her, took her by the shoulders, and asked her what her birth mother's name was. The little girl was relieved that she could finally get his attention and answered that her mother's name was Laura Koch. A chill ran down the prince's spine, and he quietly asked what the little girl's name was. The girl did not notice anything strange and calmly replied that her name was Hannah. Laura had been the Prince Charming's first love before he met Asta, and she had promised to name her daughter Hannah if she became pregnant. And this charming young man was her biological father. The young man immediately realized that the girl's mother was his former lover, so he immediately asked where her mother was now. Hannah sadly replied that her mother was no longer alive and she was in heaven. Laura Koch was a beautiful woman and the only doctor who was able to ease the pain and suffering of the prince. Initially, Laura helped Hart find a cure for his genetic disease, which was gradually destroying his heart and could lead to his imminent death. Young people became very close and spent a lot of time together, until they realized that they were in love. The girl really wanted to save her beloved, so she spent a lot of time in the library, trying to find in books the necessary method of treatment. Cock still managed to find a collection with the necessary recipe, but it turned out to be written in an ancient language, which no one understood and could not translate it to her. The relationship began to collapse after the emperor learned about the love affair between the young people and came to full fury at such news. But the prince, despite the categorical statements of his father, who threatened to deprive him of his title and inheritance, still did not intend to abandon his beloved. The girl thought that she was spoiling the young man's life and could not accept it, as she was constantly troubled by the feeling of guilt, so she decided to simply disappear from his life without saying a word. Because of the worry and unbearable longing for his beloved who did to him so ruthlessly, Hart only worsened his health and headaches began to torment him much more than before. After a while, the one who could give him the long-awaited relief appeared. It was Asta Abel. It was Laura's sudden disappearance that allowed the formation of such a beautiful couple. Laura was only a minor character. She had given birth to Hantelope all alone and tried her best to teach her everything she knew herself, and when she was done with that, she closed her eyes forever, as her illness had become very acute. So the little girl decided to seek different opportunities to meet her own father, and she was very glad that the young man believed her words when he learned that her mother was Laura Cuck. Just before her death, the mother said that if the girl told her name, Hart von Reinhardt, would surely believe her as soon as he heard it. The prince told the girl that he would believe her only because she had learned everything from Laura. Hantelope did not understand why the boy pretended that her name was unfamiliar to him, and he did not know that Coke wanted to name their daughter that. She exclaimed out loud that she was really smart because of her mother's training, but thought to herself that the reason she wanted to meet him so badly was not so that he would recognize her as his daughter. First of all, she needed to create the cure her mom had told her about. It required expensive ingredients, and the little girl had almost no money. Secondly, it required a power that can manipulate mana well. While preparing the antidote, she had managed to get the ingredients she needed, but now she needed to stay close to Hart in order to use his power. Mentally, the little girl apologized to her daddy for having to secretly borrow his power. Suddenly, Hantelope noticed that the window was already showing sunset and the sun was about to hide behind the horizon. So she grabbed the prince's hand and began to drag him along, saying that they had to hurry to St. Abel A.S. She thought, first of all, that time was of the essence in this case, and secondly, that it was necessary to save her father, who played a minor character and must die by the end of the story. Then wondered if there was a law that said only the father was allowed to save his daughter, and not the other way around. Let him wait just a little longer, and she would help him. When Hantelope first opened her eyes, she did not realize what was happening or where she was. Then she saw some beautiful woman who came closer to her and asked who was so awake. The little girl wondered who she was. When the girl took her in her arms and began to say that Mommy will now feed her, the girl fell into a stupor because how can she be her mother? After that, the girl guessed that she seemed to be reborn in another world. Although it was very hard for Laura, but she was able to bestow her daughter with love. The baby received and felt from Laura what she never had in her previous life, and that was care, attention, warmth, and love. Hantelope was overjoyed that she finally had a real family. But as it turned out, the happiness decided to last not long. Her mother began to feel very bad and almost did not get out of bed. Coke asked to listen to her carefully and not to interrupt, and then said that the girl needed to find her father. Hantelope did not understand what she was talking about, as she always thought that she did not have a father, but the mom clarified that he was alive, then added that her biological father was the beautiful Prince Hart von Reinhardt. Pointing with a glance at the second drawer of her bedside table, the woman said that a note with the address of his mansion lay there. She'd given money to Sandy's uncle, so he'd be picking her up from here soon. As soon as the little girl arrives at the palace and meets him, let her say her name and he will understand everything at once. After all, they had promised each other that if they had a daughter, the lovers would name her Hantelope. Just so, the mother left her beloved daughter, having told her almost the whole truth. Then the little girl saw the note in the drawer and realized everything. After reading that her father was Hart von Reinhardt, the little girl realized that she was not reborn, but transported. The Hantelope she became now is not even mentioned in the original story in the work, although she was the daughter of a prince. Meanwhile, our heroes arrived at the chambers where Asta was. Near her bed were 2 servants. Their task was to observe the state of health of the mistress. The young man first of all asked how his beloved was feeling. The man replied that he could see no change in her condition or improvement in a good way. The young man was visibly upset and was obviously very worried about his other half. Hannelope realized that Reinhardt felt guilty for what had happened to Abel. It was during the tea party that Asta became ill, after which she collapsed and lost consciousness. Hart was next to her at that moment, and everything happened in front of his eyes. He did not understand what was happening to her and how to help. The prince was immediately covered with guilt, because he could not protect the one who was sitting right in front of him. The boy had a wild fear of losing someone close to him again, so he decided to listen to Asta's pleas. Hannelope recalled that when she read that novel, it seemed to her that it was at that moment that Asta began to lay the groundwork for her future revenge. The little girl could not see Hart like that, for out of it, her heart was out of place. The young man asked if Duke Eisen claimed that he was absolutely innocent, for it was he who had brought the cookies that had poisoned Abel. The man replied that yes, and he promises to find the intruder himself. It is said that the gentleman even began to investigate at his home and question everyone diligently. The prince thought to himself that he should have gotten rid of this man, back when he started arguing with Asta constantly about anything. From the other end of the room, Patrick von Reinhardt's voice came out, saying that the Duke had left their palace, confidently declaring that he would find an antidote that could save the girl. Then he turned to Hart and asked him if his elder brother had come here empty-handed and had failed to find anything. The boy answered that he could not come here without anything, and he had found the antidote. Junior asked in surprise who this person was who would be able to create the antidote. Taking the little girl in his arms and holding her out in front of him, Reinhardt replied that he had gone to visit the daughter of a brilliant doctor who had helped him a lot in the past. The little girl claims to have learned pharmacology from her mother and knows how to create an antidote. Smiling, Hannelope said hello to his younger brother. Patrick looked at her in surprise, since she was just a child, and asked what could she be a child who just craved entertainment. Hart replied that she was not. Then the young man began to squeeze her cheeks and suggested that she was a sorceress who had changed her appearance by magic on purpose, but the prince replied that this version was not true either, after which he explained that she was an ordinary child, but her birth mom was a genius who taught her a lot. After the prince was silent, the little girl resented that he should have actually gone on and said that her mother had raised a genius like herself. As the guy set her back down on the floor, she thought that although he was her favorite character, he definitely lacked a sense of tact. Looking at Patrick von Reinhardt, the girl thought that she didn't expect to meet the main character of this work so soon. Just as it was described in the novel, this man makes a softer impression, unlike Hart. Meanwhile, the younger brother noticed that the little girl's eyes were pink in color. He then asked if the brilliant doctor the prince was talking about was Laura Koch. Reinhardt replied that he was. The young man was surprised that he had managed to find this woman, and he began to conclude that her biological father was Hart. The prince's expression changed immediately, and he glared menacingly at the younger man before interrupting Patrick and ordering him to shut up immediately. The little girl was at a loss and thought to herself that Hart was so unwilling to recognize her as his daughter that he began to glare at Patrick so angrily. The woman who had been watching all this exclaimed that the child should not be allowed to be involved in Asta's treatment. Then she asked him not to make such hasty decisions and to give her and Hansen some more time so that they would be able to come up with a cure. The young man told her not to worry because he had checked everything beforehand and made sure that no strange ingredients were used. The girl remembered that the girl's name was Feline. She is a member of the Temple Council and appears in the original work. Then she turned to Reinhardt and said that there was no more time to lose, so it was necessary to hurry. The prince walked over to the bed and lifted his lover's head to make it more convenient to give her the medicine. As she watched Hart inject her with the antidote, Hannelope asked forgiveness for the fact that this time things would not go the way she wanted for Asta. Because right now, the prince had a daughter on his side. Almost immediately, the girl began to gradually come to her senses, and the brothers worriedly asked how she was feeling and if she could hear them at all. A little raised, Abel asked in surprise how she was here and what had happened to her. Hart exclaimed that she couldn't remember anything at all. Mistress replied that the last thing she remembered was how she started to faint after eating a cookie. When the girl heard that there was poison in those baked goods, she was shocked, but then realized why the taste of this cookie seemed so strange to her after she took a bite. Then wondered how she had even woken up in the first place if it was the brothers who had managed to save her. After a brief pause, the prince replied that they certainly had something to do with it, but the credit given was not theirs. Then Asta turned to the members of the temple council and asked if they had done it, but the man replied that they had nothing to do with it. Glancing at Feline, who stood there without a word, Abel asked if she had done it, but why she was silent in such a case. The woman hesitated for a second and began to explain that it was Hanelope who had saved her. The little girl had managed to save the saint with the help of her medicine, which she had studied diligently. The saint was very surprised that she was saved by a small child, so she asked Hart who she was. After stroking the girl's head, the prince explained that she was the daughter of a talented doctor. When the young man gave Asta the antidote she had prepared, the girl immediately opened her eyes. The mistress was very surprised that she immediately woke up from the antidote prepared by this child. It seemed incredible to her. The little girl noticed her bewilderment, so she began to remember that the person who put poison in the cookies given by Duke Eisen was Asta herself. In the original work, Abel went to gain her strength right after she was named a saint. She purposely instilled guilt in Hart, so he became her loyal servant. While fulfilling her requests, the young man constantly received various injuries, but he did not care, even if there were bad rumors about him throughout the Empire. People whispered about Reinhardt's antics and considered him a real monster. The more the young man listened to Asta, the more people turned away from him and he became a loner. The maiden told him that he was getting too loaded for unnecessary reasons, and no one had the right to call His Highness a monster. Snuggling up to him, Abel smiled deviously, but aloud continued to express words of support, namely that she would always be on his side and to the very end. In the end, everything happened as the girl had originally intended. Reinhardt dies instead of herself. But now the story must change, because now there is Hanelope, who will bring this girl out into the open and will not allow her to commit dirty deeds. The little girl gave a playfully happy shout that she was very happy that the saint had woken up thanks to her medicine, and ran closer to Abel. Taking her hands, Asta smiled and expressed her gratitude for her rescue. She then held her face and told her that if she had really woken up from her antidote, then the little girl should know what poison had been used to poison her. The little girl exclaimed that it wasn't poison. What she had prepared was a simple tincture for fatigue. She recalled to herself that it wasn't poison that Asta had slipped into her cookies. It's a type of drug that puts a person into a deep sleep, and they can be out for weeks at a time, as if murdered. Then ordered a woman to give a false diagnosis, namely that she was poisoned. That person was Phyllis. After a while, Abel would wake up on her own. Their plan was to then diagnose the patient with a natural detoxification due to her holy power. But then Hanelope appeared and intervened and prepared a potion that could instantly get her back on her feet. This potion has a mana-boosting effect, but it is not suitable to cure Reinhardt's illness. The little girl was happy that she was able to achieve such a result by using such a nutritional supplement. Patrick wondered that if it wasn't poison, then why Asta had fainted and never regained consciousness. Acting as if she was dreaming, the girl replied that she thought the saint had simply taken too many sleeping pills. She fell into a deep sleep after that, but Hanelope was able to get her back on her feet with her mixture in no time. Junior looked at the confused Abel and asked if it was true. The girl began to deny everything and said that there was no such thing. Then began to describe how she felt after she swallowed the cookie. Her throat began to bake as if it were on fire. The maiden felt like she drank poison in its purest form. Then she glared at Hanelope and said that the child was obviously mistaken, and that the question was how she had managed to wake her up so quickly. The prince countered that no one could have awakened her until she was given the potion prepared by the child. From all this information, what comes out is that the person who should be most suspicious right now is the one who first claimed that an unknown toxic substance was found in the cookies. After that, everyone looked at Feline as she was the one who had diagnosed the mistress. The woman was horrified and started trying to justify that their highnesses had gotten it all wrong. Asta wasn't confused and immediately started saying that she hadn't expected such a thing from Feline. They were not really friends, of course, but she had no idea that the woman would do such a thing to her. After that, she began to question how she could do such a thing to her. The shocked woman could not gather her thoughts, and only scraps of phrases came out of her mouth about what the saint had promised her and what she was saying. The prince immediately ordered Hansen to quickly summon the knights and get Feline away from here as soon as possible. As the woman was led away, she screamed that this was unfair and begged to be heard, but of course no one was going to do that. Patrick put his arm around Abel and told her that she would definitely be okay now. The girl thanked him. Hanelope, who was watching the whole thing, was not surprised by this outcome. It was expected that this girl was immediately able to get out of it because she is far from stupid and cunning. Suddenly, the prince addressed the little girl by name, and she wondered what he wanted to say to her now, and even became uncomfortable as his voice seemed strange. Then he added that it was not a potion for fatigue, but a potion to restore strength. The girl was so proud of her intelligence, but she was not even aware of it. The girl did not expect such a turn and resented herself that, if at such a moment, he has nothing else to say but that. A little later, our heroine drank tea with the princes, and Patrick said that he really did not expect that she could put Asta on her feet. Then he asked if Laura Coke was her mother. The little girl's mind was spinning, however, that Hart had not only failed to praise her, but had also decided to embarrass her. She also did not understand why this young man was acting so indifferent to her. It turns out that waking Asta was not enough, and wondered what she should do to get closer to him as soon as possible. The girl pointed to some candy and asked if she could have more. Junior smiled sweetly and replied that of course. Then he asked her to give him the potion that so effectively restored his strength. Holding the potion in her hands, Hannelope replied that if he was talking about it, there wasn't much left. Yawning, Patrick said that he was very tired the last few days and wanted to use the remedy for himself. The little girl thought to herself that it would not be difficult for her to give him the remedy. But aloud she exclaimed one word, "No." The young man said he could pay for it as much as she saw fit. The girl turned to her father and said that since she had only one copy left, she would give it to Prince Hart. She thought to herself that his favor should increase after she gave him the mixture as a gift. But unfortunately, the desired effect did not happen, and Reinhardt said that he did not need it. After that, he continued to drink tea calmly. The little girl was confused and thought to herself how to make him take this medicine because she could not let him suffer or die. Patrick, who was watching the whole scene, laughed and said that the child was crazy about his big brother. Then he added that he didn't understand what she could like about the arrogant Hart unless he was prettier. Hannelope declared that she thought Prince Hart was more handsome. Patrick took umbrage at her peculiar taste. Reinhardt, meanwhile, listened to them in complete bewilderment. Suddenly, loud voices came from outside the door. The guard was saying that His Excellency should not do this without prior arrangements. But the man ordered them to stand back as it was very urgent and opened the doors to the room where the boys were sitting. Prince Hart immediately said that he was already aware of who had dared to try to poison the saint. The little girl, however, wondered to herself why Duke Eisen had shown up here. Magnus is a representative of the temple sect, and he was also appointed as Asta's guardian there. He was suspected of being involved in the poisoning of Abel. He was the one who was supposed to take care of the girl, but he neglected her, and in return, Asta did the same to him. The saint had organized all of this specifically to smear the Duke. However, this time her plan was not destined to come true. Throwing some boy in front of him, Eisen declared that it was all his fault. In his room, the man found a witch's potion that seemed to be a keepsake from his birth mother. Looking at the boy, whose eyes were full of tears, Hannelope realized that Magnus had decided to pin all the blame on his illegitimate son. The Duke and Duchess had been unable to have children for a long time, so the man decided to have a child on the side. He named him Brentley and brought him to the palace to announce him as his heir. However, it was at this point that the Duchess learned of her long-awaited pregnancy. A short time later, Eisen's rightful heir was born and named James. Brentley, who was recognized even by the Emperor himself as one of the successors to the ducal title, became a burden for the royal family. So Magnus decided not to miss this opportunity to close the issue with his bastard once and for all. Hart asked in surprise if the man was sure that the kid had tried to poison Asta. Eisen pointed his finger at the frightened boy and said that recently Brentley had quarreled with Abel because he had behaved inappropriately with her and had been punished for it. This all makes him the prime suspect in the attempted poisoning. The little girl noticed that even so, it was obvious that the poor child had a lot of bruises on his body, under his clothes. The Duke swung around to deliver another blow and ordered the boy to repent for what he had done. Hannelope immediately backed him up and informed him that this child was not guilty of anything at all, so there was no need to talk like that. The man stated that it was this guy who was involved in the fact that the saint is unconscious at this moment, and she still dares to claim that he is not to blame. The girl replied that she had already cured Saint. Magnus asked what kind of nonsense this child was talking about, but Hart stepped in and said that she was telling the truth. Asta came to her senses. She'd just taken too many sleeping pills and hadn't woken up for a long time. so it is safe to say that his son is innocent of anything. The Duke was taken aback by this information and asked what was going on here. Patrick entered the conversation and said that he would explain everything. Then the men began to talk among themselves, and our heroine stood near the boy, who sat on the floor and could not calm down. The little girl asked if everything was all right with him, and then held out a jar and said that she had a small gift for him. Let him put this medicine on his bruises, and they would go away very quickly. Then she added that he should hide it somewhere as soon as possible, lest that horrid uncle should take it away. Brentley took the jar and tearfully asked why the girl had decided to help him. Hannelope thought to herself that the child had a large number of bruises under his clothes after being beaten. He was also being treated unfairly for something she didn't even do. In that house, there was never anyone who could take his side and protect him. The boy was innocent. He hadn't chosen such a fate for himself. The girl may have acted this way because it all reminded her of her past life, in which she was unhappy. But Hannelope said aloud that she had decided to help him because he was cute. Then the girl thought of some idea that could be realized and mentally asked Brentley to be patient a little longer, and he would be saved. Meanwhile, Asta was furious as her perfect plan didn't work, but she almost succeeded in getting the arrogant Duke to bow down to her. The girl also almost succeeded in arousing Hart's guilt, but she still failed. Abel was getting angrier and angrier, so she clenched her fist harder and did not know what she should do now, because after the poisoning plan, she wanted to take advantage of Duke Moltke's weakness. This man is a representative of the Imperial faction who will be a great source of strength for Asta in the near future. There are reports that he broke the law by using the iron mine for his own selfish purposes and selling the raw materials to others. His family is unaware of the situation. If Moltke is not careful, this could be presented not only as corruption, but as full-fledged treason. It could be just the perfect opportunity to frame the Duke and get rid of him once and for all. There is a problem in that the place where the mine is located is home to a large number of different monsters. Abel wanted to pull the strings like a puppeteer and carefully convince Hart to check all this out and gather the necessary evidence as an atonement for his guilt for poisoning her. But now her brilliant plan was ruined, and it was all because of that little girl. Asta wondered who she was, for the girl had never seen her in her past life. The girl felt that there is obviously something wrong, so she needs to get rid of the little girl as soon as possible. Sometime later, our heroine stood on the steps near the palace and thought about the fact that she did not expect Hart to recognize her as his daughter, but how it was possible to just throw her out the door and not even say goodbye. The girl was met by a married couple who immediately began to reprimand her for disappearing without saying a word, and what she was even doing all this time. The man then called her a naughty girl and grabbed her by the arm, telling her to go home. Hannelope thought to herself that plus the prince also called her uncle without her knowledge. The little girl thought that she had behaved wrongly yesterday, and she should have been more assertive and shouted that Reinhardt was her father, and asked him to stop pretending he didn't understand. But, remembering her past life, when her mom told her that now she wanted to live for herself, the girl decided that this was not the way to do it either, because parents do not like clingy children. Our heroine could not imagine that her biological father could cause her such heartache. Then she remembered how she defended Brentley in front of Duke Eisen and thought that it was not for nothing, because now the future of this boy must change. Looking back at the palace, Hannelope gave herself her word that she would come back here and make Hart happy, for that was what her mother wanted. Then she shouted that she and Mr. Reinhardt would definitely meet again. It turned out that the eldest heir to the throne all this time stood at the window and watched his daughter being taken away by her relatives. Abel entered the room and asked why His Highness was still standing by the window. Hart replied that this child was annoyingly clingy to him, so he decided to watch her being taken away. But the strange thing was that she shouted that she would still come back here. Asta smiled and said she even felt a little sad because that little girl was pretty cute. The prince asked if she had really told the girl that she wanted to go home soon. The maiden lied that yes, Hannelope had come to her room early in the morning to inform her that she wanted to return to her family. Clenching her fist, Reinhardt asked what she meant by her family. Did she mean the couple who were merely her guardians? Asta replied that she did. The girl had heard of them being pretty good people. Then she added that she sympathized with them because it is not easy to raise a child, especially when you are not its mother and father. The prince stated that the girl should have consulted with him first, because he should have at least said goodbye to her before she returned home. Abel replied that after all, the girl was still very young, and perhaps she was just too scared to be away from her family for a whole night. So when she turned to her and asked her to send her home, Asta immediately agreed. She then asked Reinhardt was he really that worried about this little girl? The question took him by surprise. But the young man pulled himself together and said that just now he is indebted to the little girl, but he still needs to fulfill his duties. He reflected to himself that upon hearing the name, the young man first thought that Hanelope must be his daughter. She was supposed to be 7 years old at this point, but after double-checking the records, the boy learned that this girl was only 5 years old. Mentally turning to Laura, the prince said that since she had left him, she should have lived a decent life. Then he wondered why she had decided to name her child something other than his, and what kind of a bad man had left Coke all alone with a small child. Then he turned to Maxim, who was the chief guard, and ordered him to attach someone to the girl who had just left. If anything should happen to her, it must be reported to him immediately. A while later, the little girl exhaled as she finally finished mopping the floor of the guardian's house, and now she didn't have to carry a heavy bucket behind her. Hanelope was sad because she couldn't believe that she had ended up going back to that house anyway. Just before she died, the girl's mother asked Uncle Sandy to take care of the little girl. But as soon as she went to heaven, the man decided not to fulfill his duties and simply took away all the savings that Laura had left behind. The little girl was very hungry and noticed that her guardians had left her half a potato and some beans on the table. Chewing on the unleavened vegetables, Hanelope remembered how fancy the desserts at Heart's Palace were and how delicious they were, but then she decided to pull herself together and push the unnecessary thoughts away. Walking into her room, the little girl thought that even though her original plan had failed, she still had a lot of work to do ahead of her. Opening the drawer of the nightstand that held a book, the girl decided that if she wanted to cure her father, she shouldn't just give up. Throughout the history of the Koch clan, various pharmaceutical records have been passed down from generation to generation. In this collection, there's a whole section on various genetic diseases. This dynasty has also always suffered from one hereditary disease that makes it impossible to live for more than 30 years. Her mother, who died very young, was the last of the Koch clan, but she gave birth to her. Therefore, if anything happened to Hanelope, her family would cease to exist forever. Leafing through the book, the girl wondered if one of her ancestors had done something so horrible in the past that everyone was now afflicted with such a serious disease that shortened the length of life. Suddenly, the door of the room opened, and a boy appeared in the doorway and called our heroine disdainfully. After the little girl had exclaimed the name Burns with surprise, the lad declared that he had told her more than once to call him the Great Burns, and added that how many times had it been possible to repeat it to her. Hanelope couldn't stand him, for the vile boy was always bullying her and giving her no peace of mind. Burns swung at her and shouted at her not to dare look at him like that, for he was the eldest. The girl turned away and said that she was 7, just like him. But the little one did not stop and replied that his father told him that she was still 5. The little girl exclaimed that how many times she still need to repeat that he understood that this happened only because Mom decided to register her later. The little boy declared that it was all unimportant and began to swivel his head around, looking for any goodies that might still be left over from when she brought them over yesterday. The girl exclaimed that how could he eat it all? After all, she had been given this treat as a gift. Burns started checking her bed and telling her to remember that everything in this house belongs to him alone. Tell her to stop hiding everything and give it to him quickly. Hanelope tried to stop him, but nothing worked. In the end, in the boy's hands, was the very pharmaceutical book that had been passed down from generation to generation in the Koch family. The little girl screamed for him to give the book back to her immediately, but Burns only smirked and asked if she wanted it back so badly. In that case, have her give him some sweets immediately, or he'll burn the collection right now, whereupon he brought it close to the burning candle. The girl was very frightened that she might right now lose the only thing she had left from her mother. She rushed to the boy and began to try to snatch the book from his hands, but he was taller than her and the little girl could not reach it. The insolent boy kept demanding goodies from her in return. Hanelope had no choice but to bite his hand hard to make him lose his guard. As it happened, the boy screamed that he was in pain and let the book out of his hands. At that moment, the girl grabbed it. Uncle Sandy came running in at the shout and abruptly opened the door wide open and asked what they had going on. Burns immediately began complaining and crying loudly, showing his arm and saying that his arm hurt a lot. After hugging his son, the man started yelling at Hanalope and saying that he took her when the girl had nowhere else to go, and now she decided to thank him like this. He then grabbed her by the arm and informed her that today was the last day she dared to give him trouble. The little girl begged him to let her go as it was painful. But Uncle Sandy told her to be quiet, for someone was ready to take her away forever, and that person was now waiting in the living room. The girl was taken aback and began to wonder who it could be, if Hart had come to save her. The reality turned out to be different. There was a strange man waiting for her, who at the sight of her said that she looked quite nice and smart. After noticing her pink eye color, the stranger remarked that it was very rare. Hanalope was very frightened. Then the man handed Uncle Sandy a pouch and said that there was 10 deparos in there for this child. Examining the coins, the guardian said that the amount was very good, so if he wanted, he could take the baby girl right now. The girl was shocked that if the uncle really decided to sell her to some unknown person. The man agreed with the uncle's proposal and began to stretch his hands to the little girl, telling her to go with him. But Hanalope was not going to give up, so she elbowed the man in the face. After that, shouting to get away from her, the girl rushed to run with all her might. But suddenly her aunt materialized in front of her, who grabbed her and asked where she was going. The little girl screamed to be let go and tried to break free. The stranger asked her to be tied up so that it would not happen again and she could not escape. While she was tied up, Hanalope resisted as best she could and thought about how it couldn't end this way. Her pink eyes filled with tears, and the little girl didn't understand why she was picturing Prince Hart's face at such a terrible moment. The little girl thought about how she just wanted to be near him, just to look at her father and watch his actions. So she prayed loudly that Reinhardt would suddenly appear here and save her from those horrible people. Suddenly, the doors to the house swung open and a gentleman appeared on the doorstep, informing her that he seemed to have been called for help. Hanalope was stunned and could not believe her eyes. It seemed that such a thing was simply impossible had he really come. After bowing, Uncle Sandy asked why His Highness had come to see them. Releasing the girl from the ropes, Hart got down on one knee beside her and asked what was even going on here. Hanalope couldn't answer anything and just burst into loud sobs. The prince began to ask worriedly if she was in pain. After calming down a bit, the little girl was able to say that she was fine. Turning to the uncle and aunt, Reinhardt asked who they were to the girl. The man replied that they had merely picked her up when the girl in the neighborhood died. They then told him that some time ago a girl appeared in their small village who was lonely and had no roots or connections. And when her life was coming to an end, she became completely mad, started talking nonsense, and asked to send this child to the imperial family. Looking at Hanalope, the young man questioned if Laura really wanted this girl sent to the palace. His faithful servant Maximus replied that it was all really as the guardian said. Hart's face changed, and he ordered that the men be immediately arrested on suspicion of slave trading and sent to the proper authorities. The intruders were terrified and tried to justify themselves to His Majesty, but no one would listen to them. Taking the little girl in his arms, the prince said that she was very light. Then he asked if she was eating normally and added that, in his opinion, she should be well fed first. There was no way Hanalope could believe this was happening in reality. Hart had actually shown up when she so desperately needed help and saved her. Hadn't he sent her away because she annoyed him too much? Barely holding back tears, the little girl thanked him for showing up at the right moment and saving her from those evil people. The little girl was so nervous that she felt protected in the arms of the prince, so she just fell asleep. Hanalope recalled that in her past life, she had been an unloved child. Her father was more interested in spending time with alcohol in his hands than with his daughter. Once, when he was prevented from drinking, he became so furious that even her mother was frightened by what she saw. After some time, the father became increasingly insane, so her mother divorced him, packed her things, and took her daughter with her. After a few years, her mother managed to marry again, and she decided to introduce the newly made stepfather to her child. At that time, our heroine's name was Gia. The man smiled welcomingly, looked at her, and said that she looked a lot like her mother. He also had a daughter named Seo Da-jung, and they were the same age as Ji-yu, so the stepfather thought the girls could get along. After shaking hands, the girls promised each other to take care of each other. It was a great time for our heroine, as her new father was very kind, and Jung was a capable girl. Ji-yu believed that they could become a real family. But contrary to expectations, such harmony didn't last long. One day, when the sisters came home from school, Their stepfather asked them to sit down for a moment because he had a very important conversation with them. The man started reprimanding Seo Da-jung for her poor results and said that Ji-yu always takes first place while she was not doing well. Does she really think that's normal? The girl blushed slightly and replied with her eyes down to the floor that she tried hard. But her dad didn't believe her and told her to stop lying because he saw his daughter sitting with her face stuck in her cell phone the whole time. After that, the half-sister looked at our heroine with hatred in her eyes. The stepfather started comparing her to Gia all the time. When she would come home late, Dad would yell that didn't she see the time. Daughter that she didn't notice Gi-yu would go straight home after school and continue studying. If she had a mess in her room, Dad would yell at her and tell her to clean her room just like her stepsister. Jung couldn't stand it one day and yelled for him to stop because she was tired of hearing only about Ji-yu all the time. Then she cried and said that things used to be different and asked why things had changed once the half-sister moved in. After this situation, the mom started making remarks to our heroine. She said that it seemed that the relationship between father and daughter had become worse because of her, so she asked her to be more careful. It was unfair to Gia, but the girl decided to accept it for the sake of her mom, but unfortunately, nothing changed. The half-sister could deliberately push our heroine, pretending it was an accident, and afterwards naively asking her how she was feeling. Jung would constantly harass her while her parents weren't watching, so they were unaware of what was going on. She ruined her clothes, and her lost items, by some miracle, kept ending up in Ji-yu's room. In the end, all the blame was placed on our heroine, but the half-sister did not stop there. Hearing some noise in the corridor and concerned cries of parents about what happened to her, Gi-yu decided to leave the room and see what happened there. Our heroine got in just as Jung started complaining about hitting her hard, then added that all this time her sister was pretending because she is a completely different person at school. Ji-yu tried to justify herself and say that none of it was true, but no one listened to her and her stepfather came up and slapped her. After that, he shouted that she was not taught this kind of behavior. They are a family, and how could they do that to Jung? The man said that he was not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. The girl came into their home, and he took care of her like she was his own. Then why did she decide to repay him in this way? Then put a condition to Ji-yu's mother that either she throws her daughter out of the house now, or he would file for divorce tomorrow. The girl tried to explain everything to her mother and say that all this is not true, but in response, heard only that her mother wants to live for herself and let her daughter try to understand her. In that house, there was no more room for her. Our heroine just wanted to live happily with her mom. She did everything for that, but then why did her own mother do that to her? Abruptly waking up in tears, Hannelope didn't realize at first where and with whom she was. Then looking around, she asked the prince where they were now, for they had just been at Uncle Sandy's house. Hart replied that the little girl had fallen asleep almost as soon as she saw him, and they were now on their way to his palace. Looking out the window, the girl thought to herself, wondering if she could have been so relaxed in his arms that she had just fallen asleep. But she was actually very surprised that the young man had taken care of her. On top of that, they were now heading to his mansion. Maybe he had decided to turn her into the Imperial Orphanage. The little girl thanked the prince once again for saving her and told him to make sure she would not be lost in the orphanage. The young man looked at her incomprehensibly and asked what the girl was talking about. Hannelope asked in surprise that he wasn't going to send her straight to the orphanage now. Hart asked if she really wanted to get rid of him so badly he had not said a word about it. A while later, in the palace, Reinhardt took her to one of the bedrooms and told her that from now on, it would be her room. If she needed anything, she could call a maid. The girl could not believe her eyes and ears because she was sure that the young man would send her to the orphanage. After that, Reinhardt wished her pleasant dreams and left to go about his business. The little girl thought that she was certainly very pleased to be near Hart, but why suddenly he decided to give her such a luxurious room and what was going on in his head. It had been 3 whole days since Hannelope had entered the prince's palace. The young man allocated for her not only a bedroom, but also a separate laboratory where she could do her favorite work. The girl never thought that she could be here again. Moreover, Hart somehow managed to get her mother's pharmaceutical book with research, which our heroine could not take away from Uncle Sandy's house. The little girl thought she had lost it forever, but was very happy to hold it in her hands again. The little girl's life has changed a lot from poor to rich. She was brought new clothes and delicious food every day. But the problem was that Hannelope had never yet managed to meet the prince after that time. Whenever she came, the servants kept saying that he wasn't in the palace. That very day after her rescue, the young man brought the girl to his mansion. The little girl thought that he had recognized her as his daughter. Did he decide to ignore her simply because he did not want to see her? Or maybe he went to Asta at all because, in the work, Abel's influence on the prince began around this time. The girl was afraid that he wouldn't be able to resist it. Putting aside her reflections, Hannelope handed Dickon a homemade ointment of her own making and said that his wrists had been very sore lately, so let him anoint them with this remedy. The man was pleased that she remembered this and thanked her. He then added that lately, all the staff at the palace are just talking about how good her medication is and how great it is. Even though the little girl had no way of meeting her father, she was happy that she was able to make friends with all the servants. In her heart, she hoped that Hart would not be hurt in any way, but it was still necessary to prepare all the necessary medicines in advance, just in case. In the evening, the girl was about to go to bed as her eyes were just slipping, but then it dawned on her that Reinhardt should be in his chambers. She quietly crept into the corridor and saw that his room was not guarded at the moment. So she quickly ran into his chambers and exhaled that she had succeeded and remained unnoticed. Hart did find himself in his bed, but it looked like he was in a lot of pain. The little girl remembered from the novel she had read how Asta had taken his hand and, looking straight into his eyes, told him that only His Majesty was able to help her. The boy realized that being near Abel was very dangerous, but he could not refuse her. At that moment when his beloved abandoned him and his own father decided to forget about his existence, she was the only one who was on his side, and all the others just turned away. The prince had no feelings for this girl, but it was nice to spend time with her, forgetting the loneliness. But it could be compared to taking an anesthetic for an open wound. After Hart fulfilled Asta's request, he thought that now all her problems should have been solved. But during the battle, Reinhardt was wounded with a poisoned dagger. He didn't want to ask for help as he knew it could be a problem for Abel, but if he pretended to be crazy, she would be perfectly fine. He needed to get through this all on his own. Just like the time his own father turned his back on him. After ingesting the poison, the young man felt very ill. He was hot, and his whole body felt like it was on fire. Suddenly, he felt something cold on his forehead and did not realize who was next to him. The touch seemed very familiar to him, as if Laura had touched him. Abruptly grabbing the hand of the man who was tending to him, he saw Hannelope in front of him. The young man immediately asked in surprise how she had ended up in his room. She said she wanted to see him and had waited all day, but he had not returned. So she decided to come at night when the prince should definitely be there and saw that he had a high fever. This situation reminded her of her mother's last days, so the girl could not leave him alone. When her mother became very ill, there was nothing else she could do but that. The young man thought to himself that, was this little child really taking care of her dying mother alone? Even when this little girl suddenly left his mansion, Reinhardt did not stop constantly thinking about her. After Laura left him, she met a man and became pregnant by him. For the prince, she was the only one he would never want to see again. But for some reason unknown to him, the young man could not leave her daughter in trouble, so he decided to take the girl with him, and now did not know what to do with her next. The young man asked why the little girl decided to give those nutritional supplements to him alone. The girl replied that it was because her mom said that His Majesty liked them. The prince asked that, did Laura really tell her about him? Hannelope answered that she had, but only told her not to tell anyone. She also said that the baby's daddy really liked them, no matter how bitter they were. Hart covered her mouth sharply with his hand and exclaimed what else Laura could have said to her. But then, as if belatedly, the words came to him, and he asked what, if anything, the girl wanted to say that he was her father. Hannelope thought he was mocking her, for she had long ago told him her name. Could it be that he had brought her to the palace for nothing without even realizing it? Hart muttered that because the record said that she was only 5 years old, but if she was his daughter, the girl should be about 7 by now. The little girl freaked out at the question and started waving her arms around, saying that she was actually 7. It was written down everywhere only because her mother was working hard, and it turned out to be registered a little later than it should be. The prince couldn't believe that she was really his daughter. From the beginning, he noticed that her eyes were exactly the same as Laura's, but now he noticed that she had the same blonde hair as his. The young man realized that his beloved had not forgotten their promise to each other. But the young man did not understand why she did not return to him when she found out about her pregnancy. The babe gently asked if he would stop avoiding her after he found out everything. The young man asked if he was avoiding her. He was just busy and nothing more. Hannelope replied that she stood at his door every day waiting for him, but never got to meet him. Then looked pleading and asked if she could sleep here tonight with him. But her father picked her up in his arms and said no. Then he carried her in his arms to her room. The girl didn't understand why, because the atmosphere was so suitable. Remembering that the prince had a fever, the little girl touched his forehead, which was no longer as hot as before. Hart said that if that was the only problem, she shouldn't worry so much. After that, he put her to bed and added that she should not worry about him, so she could sleep well, and wished her a good night's sleep. On the way to his chambers, the young man thought about why the girl still communicates with him so formally, after all, not even once called Daddy. The next morning, the little girl ran happily after the maid because Hart decided to have breakfast with her. He had finally stopped avoiding her. Now that she was closer to the prince, it would be much easier for her to protect him from Abel. In the girl's imagination, the father listened to his daughter's words. But the reality was quite different. Sitting at breakfast in sepulchral silence, Hannelope realized she was wrong. She of course understood that her favorite character has a heavy character, but to so much, so what she even counted on was unknown. The little girl had already tasted so many wonderful dishes in this palace since she got there, but today everything seemed to be much tastier than usual. Noticing that Reinhardt was keeping his eyes on her, Hannelope wondered why he was staring at her like that. The girl began to try to make some conversation with him, so she offered to try the pancakes, saying that they were very tasty, and if you add honey, it was delicious. She also offered to try the meat, which was very juicy and flavorful. Better than that, she had never tasted before, but Hart continued to sit in silence. After several unsuccessful attempts, the little girl thought about the fact that the prince looked so indifferent, as if some annoying dog was sitting next to him. Then she wondered how awkward it would be if she called him Daddy, but then she quickly dismissed it and thought it was best not to try. Noticing that Hannelope was silent, the prince asked her what was wrong, if she was upset about something. She answered that it was because of him. For whatever she said, her father did not listen to her, but she said aloud that it did not matter. Reinhardt said that after breakfast he wanted to buy her some clothes that she needed. Hannelope immediately drew a picture in her head of them walking together and eating ice cream, because shopping with Hart is a good opportunity to get closer. A while later, a woman named Bichon introduced herself as a clothing designer, and then pointed to two girls and said they were her assistants. The little girl was upset because in her imagination, everything was different, and Hart had just called the designer here and did not even deign to come. The girl began to be shown a variety of outfits and told that everything should fit her well. One of the assistants exclaimed that her measuring tape had broken and she didn't know what to do. The maid replied that there was no need to worry so much. There was one just like it in the mansion and she would bring it right over. Lady de Bichon thanked her and asked her to bring her a few cups of tea at the same time. She was not fussy and would drink anything that was made for her. When all the maids had gone, the girl began to feel very uncomfortable for some reason. Then the designer turned to the little girl and asked if she liked something, but our heroine replied that not really. Showing her a cute pink dress, which was dotted with beads, de Bichon asked what she thought about it. Hannelope had the thought that it had so much jewelry on it that it would be hard for her to even move. Then the woman showed her blue dress, which was also studded with stones and beads, and asked what she thought of it. The little girl was very embarrassed, but she was able to answer that it wasn't quite right. The designer's face changed, and she thought to herself that this girl was too picky. What kind of taste could an illegitimate child who didn't even know her roots have anyway? Hannelope noticed that their behavior changed a lot after the maids left, but she didn't understand why. The assistant started talking loudly about how this girl seemed to be living in her own imaginary world, so there was no point in trying at all and they should call it a day. The little girl began to guess that these girls had sent the maids away on purpose to show their true attitude and stop being lusciously nice. The designer threw our heroine off the couch and ordered her to immediately look at all the dresses that were brought to her for selection. Then said that she should like it all, so let her buy and not show off. The assistant exclaimed that everything was happening just like with that ducal bastard. Thanks to de Bichon, she was able to sell everything again. Hannelope realized that they were treating Brentley the same way, if not worse, so she didn't want to be here anymore. The girl could hear the women discussing the fact that they had managed to sort everything out so quickly. She was about to leave, but she heard them talking about whether His Highness really had only one illegitimate child, because there were rumors that there could be many more. Also, someone had recently died in a brothel, and they say the prince was there at the time. One hears that the young man has been stealing other people's sacred objects and climbing into houses to do so, but now seems to have moved on to murder as well. They say he used to be different, but now it's like he's possessed by an evil spirit. Maybe someone even put a curse on him. He's a monster and a disgrace to the empire. The little girl immediately covered her ears with her hands to her father, whom she ran into the doorway and asked him not to listen to this. Hart von Reinhardt was the name of the most hated man in the empire. His father, the emperor, refused him, and afterward he fell into the tenacious hands of Asta, whom he thought was a savior. But in fact, the girl just used him for her own devious purposes. More thefts of sacred objects, as well as murders and brothels, all this is the work of Asta, but not the prince. Unfortunately, all suspicion fell on him anyway. Pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, being betrayed by the person closest to you, hearing constant criticism from people you don't even know. This is something that Hanelope knows better than anyone. The little girl became very upset and tears came to her eyes. Reinhardt held her little hands and didn't understand what was happening to her. Meanwhile, the designer, who was unaware of the prince's presence, scornfully exclaimed where the little thing had gone. Soon, for the maids would be back. Hart immediately appeared in front of her, holding the little girl in his arms, and noted that it seems that they have an interesting conversation and she cannot worry. His daughter is here with him, so let the girls continue a nice conversation, and he will listen carefully. Nobles have always liked to publicly spend money on their bastards in order to enhance their reputation in the eyes of others. However, this was only the material side of support. In fact, they didn't care about how others felt about their illegitimate children at all. It was all just to create a noble image that they were responsible for their blood. The female designer was confused as to why His Highness was here. She thought to herself that it was the first time she was in such an awkward situation, and how to get away with it was unknown. Walking around the room, the young man asked her why she thought he had come here. De Beauchamp began to harp on the fact that she had brought a great many different outfits for the young lady. The very best of those available in her store were selected. After trying the dress to the touch, the prince replied that he could see it perfectly well, but he did not understand what rags it was at all. All the things are of terrible quality and ridiculously beaded. His daughter can't wear something like this. Do they mean to say that she should go to the imperial palace in such dresses? It would be a great disgrace. The little girl was dumbfounded at what she heard. Did her father really decide to introduce her to the emperor himself, or was it just to put those girls in their place? Brentley had been to him once before, too. At that time, the Duke had no children, and the couple did not know if they could have their own, so he decided to make the illegitimate son his heir. But Hart doesn't even have a wife at the moment, so there's no need to introduce Hanelope to the emperor. Maybe in the future he will have native children who will appear in the marriage and be the rightful heirs. The maidens immediately fell to their knees and began to beg his forgiveness, saying that they had behaved very wrongly. They did not want to upset the prince and offend his little daughter. The young man replied that with what joy he should forgive them, they themselves said that he was a real monster, so now let them get what they deserved. Then he shouted to the guards to take them away immediately. The women asked His Highness to forgive them this time, but the prince was adamant and would not listen to anyone. Hart noted that what had happened and what he had heard had upset the little girl. He was used to such gossip about himself and did not pay attention to it, but the girl did not. Then the picture of Hanelope covering his ears with her hands and calling him daddy came to his mind. It felt good to him, and he decided that now he was a little more comfortable with her than before. It seemed that the boy was beginning to get used to her. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his daughter, who asked if it would be okay if she met her grandfather, the emperor. The young man in response asked what embarrassed her, because she was his own daughter, and therefore has every right to be introduced to His Highness. The little girl still didn't understand why he wanted to do that, because according to history, the emperor was one of the sources of Hart's suffering. The young man tried not to come face to face with him at various events. Now, if he introduces Hanelope as his illegitimate daughter, their relationship could be spoiled finally and irrevocably. But the prince added that he had always despised imperial families and other aristocrats who didn't want to take responsibility for their bloodlines. After all, these were their children, and they had to be responsible for them. Looking into her eyes, he said that he thought it was all wrong because such people wanted the child to take responsibility for being born, but he was not to blame and did not choose such a fate for himself. So the young man decided not to do that to Hannelope. She shouldn't be so worried because when she appeared before His Majesty, no one else would dare to question her legitimacy. Hearing all these words, the little girl remembered why Hart was her favorite character in the work, so she decided to do everything in her power in order not to let him down. The girl exclaimed sharply that she needed to study a lot. Reinhardt wondered why. Hannelope explained that if she was to go to the palace, she would need to learn a great deal of information. The prince replied that she was right because he was going to hire a tutor for her anyway, so this was a very good idea. The little girl stated that she would very much like to be tutored by the princess, who was the one and only in the whole empire. Hart countered that this princess is definitely not what they are portrayed as in fairy tales. She fits more the description of a devil, whether his daughter needs such a thing at all, but Hannelope replied that she would very much like to meet her in person. The young man said he had heard her. He then added that let her call him Daddy in order not to look weird in front of others. It should also be done more boldly and casually than it was before. The little girl could practice it right now while the two of them were together. The girl gathered her thoughts and cautiously said, Daddy, then asked if that was the right way to say it. The young man replied that it was enough for now and stood up to go on about his business. Hannelope hadn't expected him to snap so abruptly, but she seemed to notice the corners of his mouth lift slightly, but maybe she imagined it. Could it be that such a formidable man, who kept his composure at all times, smiled slightly at her words? A little while later, another dress was put on the little girl, and the maid exclaimed that this one suited her much better than all the ones they had brought from that store. The girl noted that it seemed that all that had happened last time still did not give them peace. After all, they had come back a little later, and after they had found out what had happened, they were very upset, and it was hard for Hannelope to calm them down, as the girls blamed themselves for leaving her alone, defenseless, with those wicked witches. The next day, Hart called another designer to order the necessary clothes, and no one let her out of their sight. The fitting was supervised by Reinhardt and the maids. But the problem was that there were so many outfits, and she was tired of trying them all on. She hadn't expected it to be so tedious. When they finally finished, the girl decided to go to her laboratory to do her favorite thing, various experiments. Behind one of the doors, Hannelope heard Hart's voice and wondered why he was home today, and in general, what kind of room it was, so she decided to go to see what was going on there. Having opened the doors, the girl saw men who were discussing important issues and realized that it was a room for negotiations. She immediately began to apologize for bursting in so untimely and tried to close the doors behind her, which turned out to be very heavy and did not yield to her at once. But suddenly there came the voice of her father, who asked why she stood there, let her come through and sit down beside them. The little girl was confused that she was actually allowed to come in and pondered where she should sit. Noticing that the girl was getting very agitated, the prince took her under his arms and told her she could sit down here. Settling her into his lap, Hart turned to the others and said they could move on to the next topic. Coughing, one of those present asked who the girl was. The other replied that he had heard rumors that a young man had brought a child with him. Everyone immediately began to talk about how this little girl was his own daughter. The prince answered that they thought correctly and that the child in front of them was really his. Her name is Hannelope von Reinhardt. The girl could not believe her ears that he introduced her to his vassals, which means that he is not going to hide her from the eyes of others and will recognize her officially. Twirling his mustache, one of the men asked if that was why the council had been called so urgently. He was even curious because His Highness had even tried to address the red ghost issue that he usually ignored. Hannelope remembered that there was a newspaper in the novel that was published regularly and liked to write nasty things about Hart. However, the name of the publisher was kept secret, so she never found out who wrote the articles. In this piece, Reinhardt ignored what the paper had written until his death. Could it be that now he had decided to deal with the problem and be done with it? Then she looked at the papers on her father's desk and realized that they were articles of provocation and slander. Placing his hand on the table, covering what was written, the young man told Baron Maytu that they would discuss the matter a little later. The man apologized and replied that if he were in his shoes, he too would not want to show such papers in front of such a pretty girl. It dawned on the little girl that the prince had decided to deal with all this because of her. Maybe he had noticed her worried expression when that designer was talking nonsense about him. Hart said that he would try to make sure that there were no more things in the country that did not like his daughter or somehow hurt her morale. Hannelope gasped that the prince, who cared for no one else but Asta, had decided to do such a thing for her. Then she began to remember that some people who had read the novel already had suspicions about who the editor of this newspaper was. Most of the articles were about Hart's secret forays. She did not know what he was doing in his palace, but she was well aware of what the young man was doing outside of it. The girl speculated that the publisher might be one of Reinhardt's vassals present, who was his confidant and in the know. After the meeting was over and everyone was about to leave, the little girl called Baron Mato, and he asked if she had anything to tell him. Hannelope said she did. Then she showed her dress and added that the first designer was bad, but the second one was good, and she was the one who picked out her outfit. Twirling his mustache, the man asked the little girl who exactly was the first one to come to her and why she suddenly turned out to be bad. The little girl thought that everyone was aware of the fact that after the employees of a rather successful clothing store visited Prince Hart's mansion, they went bankrupt in a flash. There were rumors that the designer and her assistants made some kind of mistake that offended the royal family, but no one knows what exactly happened and how much they hurt the honor and dignity of His Majesty. Meanwhile, the man became very curious, and he began to pry from her what happened there and whether the girl was there. Without thinking, Hannelope told him what had happened quietly in his ear so that no one else could hear. The man exclaimed that how dare they behave like that. The little girl hissed at him and asked him to be quiet, for it was a secret. Baron Matu replied that of course she could be sure that he would not tell anyone anything. Then he waved his hand at her and said that he had urgent business to attend to, so he had to go. Our heroine had no confidence in him, but it didn't matter as she just wanted to get the information to the right person. Hannelope thought that she needed to be smarter and set traps. She would definitely try to find whoever was spreading these bad rumors, so she began to approach each of the vassals and pull the same scheme she had with the Baron. Some time ago, the divine oracle that served Pratch had descended on the main temple of Berg. He informed them that he would send to them a saint who could revive the dead springs, as well as bring the dead back to life. She would be stationed on Earth as his representative. For this purpose, it was necessary to find the source of life on Mount Perosin. It was there that people would await their savior, who would fundamentally change their lives. At the very place the oracle pointed to, there was a black-haired girl who came from another dimension. She looked like an ordinary person, but had supernatural powers. People nicknamed her the Miracle Saint Gina and had high hopes for her, so they treated her with care and respect. Asta was immediately told that from today, this girl would become a member of their family. The family would give her Abel's room, and she would use the one on the 3rd floor. Her fiancé, with whom the wedding date had already been set, declared that he had fallen in love with Gina and asked to break the engagement without scandal. From that very moment, the girl's life completely changed. This saint was loved by everyone and took away everything that was dear to Asta. The girl could not contain her anger, so she began to openly mock Gina as long as no one sees. This girl, however, was not as simple as it seemed at first glance, so she decided to take revenge in a rather cruel way. She falsely accused Asta of trying to kill her. After that, Abel was sentenced to death. The girl didn't understand why everyone believed in Gina, so she begged for someone to let her get revenge. She would give everything she had for such an opportunity. Her musings were interrupted by the voice of a servant who informed her that it was time for her to get ready to leave. Asta didn't understand why she was having visions from her past life. They even made her feel sick. But now everything was all right and it could not happen again because now she herself was a saint. After the execution, Asta met Pratchu, who asked her if she was really ready to sacrifice everything for revenge. Would she be willing even if it were her own life? It is in his power to bring her back to the past, but in return, he wants to take her soul. Now, when a girl is asked to clean a river, for example, all she has to do is cast a discoloration spell and pretend as if she is actually cleaning the water. In order to demonstrate healing, the saint first uses a paralyzing spell to make it look like the child is about to die, and then simply gives him the antidote. But it can end very badly if the people find out the truth. Therefore, it is necessary as soon as possible to convince everyone of her supernatural abilities before Gina comes into this world. After that, if the rival will create a miracle, it will simply become a copycat of Abel and nothing more. The girl will never give up what is hers and will not allow herself to be treated negligently. A while later, Asta asked her subordinate if the oracle had come. The boy, holding a scroll in his hand, replied that he had come again. After her rebirth, Abel had gained a new talent, and it was the ability to read writings in the Hay language. The records reported an illegal auction at Taver's house where one of the lots was a red pendant. Saint realized that, in fact, she had only been given such an ability by Pratch to be his errand girl. Abel had already given her soul to him, so why did he keep asking her for something? He was the one who called Gina into this world and allowed Asta to be reborn in order to take revenge on her rival. He seemed to be playing with people's lives for his own amusement. Tossing the scroll back to the young man, the girl said that it was again a very annoying thing and she didn't want to deal with it, so she'd better give it to Hart, who would have to solve everything. The girl noticed that at the moment her relationship with Reinhardt had changed a lot and was no longer the same as it had been before. The young man had become distant from her and no longer obeyed all her requests. Asta was sure that it was because of the child, and everyone said that the prince recognized her as his daughter and devoted a lot of time to her. But in order to prepare for the arrival of Gina, the girl needs a faithful dog like Hart. She cannot let this girl take him away from her. After all, the guy does all the dirty work. Having spent half the night in bed, Hannelope could not fall asleep no matter how hard she tried. So she decided to go to her lab and continue doing what she was doing earlier, which was experimenting. Suddenly, her attention was attracted by some people who were standing on the street and talking about something. In one of them, she recognized her father, who had dressed in dark clothes and prepared the most ordinary carriage, which was not conspicuous. Apparently, it was all done in order not to draw attention to herself. The little girl could not understand where he was going so late and in such a form. Then our heroine realized what he was going to do, and she could not believe that today was the day. Hart will face another problem because of Asta, which could end badly for him. After a while, Reinhardt's carriage arrived at the destination, namely at Taver's house, where the auction was to take place. The young man told Maxim that he and Abel would go first and let him join them after he had finished his task. Suddenly, the guard heard some noise and banging coming from the carriage, so he decided to check who was there. Opening the box, the young man saw Hannelope, who smiled sweetly and said hello to him. The guy was very surprised and exclaimed what she was doing here. Had the little girl been sitting there since the beginning? Maxim grabbed his head and said that she didn't have to do that, because now His Highness would scold her if he found out about it. The girl seemed to know where they were going since she had decided to go with them. Hannelope thought to herself that of course she knew. After all, this is an illegal auction house. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary building that doesn't even catch the eye, but in fact, there are illegal auctions going on in its basement. The piece said that Abel was sent to this place by a demon god for the sake of the sealing stone. However, where this jewel is located, bad things always happen. That's why Asta took Hart with her, to use him as a shield. So the little girl needs to separate the two as soon as possible, for she can't leave her father in trouble. Maxim asked that, does Hannelope really care that much about Reinhardt? The girl replied that of course she did, because he was the best daddy she had ever had. The guardian exclaimed that at last the young man had a man who was ready not only to take everything from him and demand, but also to give in return. In the work, Maxim only silently followed the prince wherever he went and was always ready to come to the rescue. But after his death, he began to regret very much that he did not interfere in his affairs and did nothing to prevent his death. The young man began to ask the little girl to go back to the palace to avoid unpleasant situations. Hannelope replied that her papa had told him to follow him as soon as he had finished his business. Would it be all right if the young boy disobeyed his orders? The boy thought for a moment and made a promise to the little miss to behave himself and not get involved in anything. Meanwhile, Hart and Abel made their way to the room where the illegal trading was about to begin. The prince listened to the talk that one of the women had come here because she had heard of some magic items for sale, and a man had come for a slave girl. The young man felt uncomfortable that the slave trade was so openly practiced here. Breaking the silence, Asta asked how Hannelope was doing. The prince replied that his daughter was fine. The girl stated that was fine, but was he sure the little girl was really his daughter? After all, he hadn't heard anything about Laura since she had left him. If there was such a need, there was always room for illegitimate children in the temple, and they would be well taken care of there. The young man became angry and hissed that Hanalope was his daughter, and it was his duty to take care of her, not hers, so there was no need to interfere in their affairs. Asta exclaimed that perhaps he had misunderstood her, for the girl only wanted to help, but the young man replied that he understood everything as it should be. Then he added that today he was helping her for the last time. After all, now he has a child, and he should refrain from such dangerous situations. If she needed any help, the prince would help her, but not as he usually did. The girl did not even have time to start to change his mind, as the voice of the host was heard, who shouted that it was time to start their auction and let all the guests take their seats. Abel began to think to herself why he had changed so drastically. How could he change so much just because of a child? If it was his bloodline, that was the problem. If only she had known earlier that it could end up like this, she would have gotten rid of it back then. Afterward, she replayed in her head the memories of how she had met Laura. The girl was stunned to see Abel in her house and asked in surprise what she was doing there. The girl replied that she didn't think she'd be so easy to find, as Hart had wanted to meet her in person more than once and was constantly on the lookout for her. Did she even know that it was because of her that the prince was on the verge of being banished from the royal family, let alone inheriting the throne? Ko was shocked that because of their relationship, his lover was in such serious trouble. Poking her finger into her chest, Abel ordered her to stay away from him. Since she herself had made the decision to run away, let her not dare to return, and advised her to find a place where the prince would not be able to find her. Apparently at that time, Laura was already in childbirth. If the saint had only known about it, she would certainly have killed her. But now, despite the sudden appearance of her daughter, Asta needs to complete all her affairs to the end. If Hart loses someone dear to his heart again, he will definitely go off the rails and break down. After that, we'll be ready to fulfill any of her requests. Meanwhile, the host presented the next item to the guests. It was an obedient slave, which, according to him, is so strong that it will be ideal for any dirty deeds. The starting bid was 500,000 gold pieces, and those present immediately began offering various sums more to take the boy for themselves. The prince inquired what Abel needed to purchase here. Asta replied that a pendant with a red stone. Hart replied that it would be best if he bought it in his own name, for it was too risky to shine Asta's name in such an illegal place. The girl smiled and thanked His Highness. Then the young man, saying that it would be good to buy something else, raised the bid to 20 million for that unfortunate boy. The guests were dumbfounded and couldn't outbid such a large sum, so the winner was obvious. The saint immediately asked why he needed that slave. The prince replied that he was using him as a witness. Because when they are done with the girl's business, then Hart intends to destroy this filthy place. But what also worried him was that Maxim had been greatly delayed. In the meantime, the doors to the auction room opened and the capital's guards rushed in, saying that it was necessary to seize all those involved in the nefarious auction. Some time ago, Maxim had brought Hanalope to them and asked them to keep an eye on her for a couple of hours. The girl was not confused and began to tell him that there was a very strange house around the corner because people went in there, but the lights in the windows were not lit anywhere. The guard wondered if she was talking about illegal bidding, which they had been looking for a long time. Going into the hall, Maxim thought that of course he knew that these guys were very eager to promote themselves, but he couldn't assume that they would immediately decide to organize a raiding party to take the whole house by storm at once. After that, he watched for a while as the guards tied up all the organizers of this event. Then I wondered where His Highness had gone. If he wasn't on the first floor, then maybe he had been sent to the second floor. While he was running to inform the prince about what was happening, he came across a young man on the way. Maxim grabbed him sharply and said that if he behaved well, he would let him go because there was no need for a fight now. But the stranger broke out of his hands, cutting his shoulder with a dagger, and ordered him to stay out of his way. The young man thought to himself that this guy seemed dangerous for a reason, so it was necessary to deal with him as soon as possible. But suddenly the young man stopped feeling his hand and realized that the blade was poisoned with some kind of poison. The stranger exclaimed that Maxim was holding up well because anyone else would have fainted. However, he had no time to talk as he was in a hurry, so he would finish with him very quickly. The young man thought to himself that in any other situation he would not care about the wounds, but at the moment it is necessary to be as careful as possible. Suddenly, out from under his clothes came Hanalope, who was greedily gulping fresh air and resenting the fact that she had almost suffocated. The little girl immediately asked the young man to get out of their way, because they needed to find her father as soon as possible. Then she threw a vial of liquid at him. As soon as the liquid hit the man, he immediately fell to the floor and began to roll on it from side to side, wailing that he was in great pain. The girl told Maxim not to waste any time and grabbed him. After the stranger had been tied up by the guard and taken away, the young man exclaimed that he had asked Hanalope to sit down and keep her head down. The little girl replied that it seemed to her that Maxim was in danger and might lose, so what else could she do? And in fact, if he was so weak, then how was he protecting her daddy? The boy began to justify that only for a second he lost his guard. The girl replied that it was all unimportant and let him better show his wound. Maxim said that he was fine and that he would deal with the scratch later, but Hanalope objected that it was necessary to deal with it now, so as not to regret it later. She thought to herself that the boy had been cut with a poisoned dagger. At first, it might just seem like the hand had lost a little sensitivity, but soon the poison could spread through the body and cause death. In the piece, Hart was stabbed with such a poisonous blade. The young man survived, of course, but suffered the consequences for a long time. That's why you can't let this happen to Maxim. Better to help him now than to deal with a long and hard treatment later. Then she began to treat his wound with some medicine. It was very good that the little girl thought about possible contingencies and took all the medicines with her just in case. After bandaging the young man's wounded shoulder with a bandage, the little girl said that she was done and everything should be fine now. The boy thanked her for her help and asked what she had poured on that stranger that he had almost fainted. Hanalope replied that it didn't matter. The remedy wasn't anything special, but it had had the desired effect. Pulling his cloak apart, Maxim told the girl to climb back in, as it was imperative to find His Highness as soon as possible. Suddenly, a small pebble landed on the young man's head. He didn't realize what it was at first, but then he realized to look up and saw Reinhardt standing on one of the balconies. Going up to him, Maxim realized that the prince was safe and asked why he was alone and where the saint was. Hart replied that she had left first. Looking down, the Lord said he should have raided much earlier, but now he didn't expect guards to be here. Suddenly, the doors swung open, and the guard began to say thank you to His Highness for being the reason why an illegal trading house in the area had been eliminated. The prince was very surprised, not understanding what he was talking about or how he even knew the young man was here. Maxim coughed and stated that Hart had secretly exposed the lair of these no-good people. It was a secret mission, so he can't give all the details. Reinhardt only wanted to ask a bunch of questions about what was even going on when he saw Hanalope hiding behind his subordinate's groin. After that, the young man realized thanks to whom everything happened like that, and the questions fell away. Thus, Hart was transformed in the people from a real monster to a dark knight who risks her life for good intentions. Sometime later, the prince demanded an explanation. Maxim replied that it wasn't until he arrived at the trading house that he realized someone was hiding in the carriage. That stranger turned out to be the little miss. Since he couldn't take her with him to the illegal auction, he decided to give the little girl to the city guard for a while. Reinhardt replied that he could still understand that, but how come they had stormed off to the auction? Hanalope stepped into the conversation and claimed that she had told them everything herself. At first, Maxim was confused too and didn't understand what she'd done it for. The little girl answered that because her daddy does it for the good of people, so she wanted others to understand and be aware of it too. The girl was glad that His Highness's faithful servant understood everything and played along with her perfectly. It was, of course, even a little too much, but still. Reinhardt replied that it was clear to him everything, but then asked the question why the daughter went here for them. Let her tell him the way it really is. Hanalope was confused as to what she should do, for her father was angry that she had interfered in their affairs, but then she pulled herself together and replied that she had done it out of fear. Hart exclaimed that of course she was afraid, for it was no place for little children, and why had her daughter gone into such danger, and what if she had been hurt? The little girl replied that he misunderstood her. The girl was afraid that her father would leave after her mother, and she would never see him again. Hart was going somewhere late at night, and that meant danger, so she followed him to protect him, and her father didn't even realize it. Reinhardt asked in surprise why she should protect him, because he was an adult and he should take care of the little girl's safety, not the other way around. Hanalope cried and replied that she had done it for her beloved parent. There was nothing she could do when her mom went to heaven, and so she was very afraid that she might lose him as well. The girl thought that she just wanted to save the man, but she noticed that in the last days, Hart's attitude towards her had improved noticeably, so she did everything even unknowingly. But when she just saw such was his cold gaze with which he looked at her, she couldn't hold back and cried. The little girl tried to calm herself down and wipe away her tears, for Reinhardt hates it when others cry. Then she began to hide under Maxim's cloak and thought about how she could not contain her emotions. Had she turned into a real child just because she was reborn in a child's body? If the little girl continued like this, Hart might give up on her and history would repeat itself. After that, she remembered how she was betrayed by her own mother in her past life, when her half-sister set her up and the girl was kicked out of the house, and her mom didn't stand up for her and said she wanted to live for herself. But suddenly, Reinhardt took her out from under his cloak and took her in his arms. He said that she had followed him because she was worried about his safety and that he might die. Our heroine began to choke again tears, and she could not utter a word. Noticing this, Hart held his daughter close to him and told her not to be afraid. He would not die so easily. It was the last time he was doing such dangerous things, so the little girl can no longer worry. Our heroine could not believe her ears that Reinhardt, for her sake, decided to stop doing such things. Meanwhile, the prince remembered how the guards had burst into the auction room and started yelling that they would arrest everyone for being involved in illegal bidding. Hart told Asta to leave as soon as possible first, and the young man would do the rest himself. Lastly, Abel apologized and told him that she would be indebted to him, because after all, he was the only one she had. The prince told her that she need not worry, for today was the last day he would help a saint. Asta cautiously asked what his words meant. The boy explained that he now had a child and needed to be careful about such things, so he would help her in a different way. The young man should think about his own safety and his daughter's first and foremost. Hart stroked Hannelope's face and told her that he promised her that he would never leave her. Baby felt his warmth and thought he was saying all the right things and couldn't leave her. Sometime later, at a meeting of the vassals in the palace, Baron Mayton asked if Little Miss was reading the news again. The girl exclaimed that yes, it was very interesting to her, and asked in return if they liked to do it. The men said among themselves that she was clever, but still a child, but that when the son of one of them was her age, he liked to play grown-up too. Hannelope thought to herself that it was very difficult to read text upside down, but the upside was that she was able to put their guard down considerably. As she read the article, which stated that a trading house had been discovered days ago where illegal auctions were being held and that all the items had been confiscated and the participants imprisoned, the little girl noted that, unlike the piece, no one recognized that the prince was there. When the captain of the guards learned about the secrecy of this operation, he did not tell anyone anything, having previously given the word to His Majesty. Suddenly, our heroine saw a text which wrote that there are rumors that Abel went to the eastern lands in search of a source of life, and perhaps Prince Reinhardt went on a journey with her. The little girl got angry and thought that it couldn't be true. Most likely, Asta is just going to pressure Hart into following her. Most likely, the saint wants to go there from behind Mount Paro. It's where Duke Moltke's residence is located, and it's also where iron ore is illegally mined. Abel wants to get proof of this in order to accuse the man of treason. But Moltke is not a simple man either, so no one will not let her get close to his territory so easily. Most likely she wants to send Hart there so that he fights instead of her, and the girl remained unharmed. If Reinhardt refuses to fulfill her demands, then Abel will do everything to damage the prince's image through various harsh statements. This will all make the emperor very angry, and Hanlope's father will have no choice but to obey her. Just such a despicable method used the saint in the work, so the little girl, by all means, it is necessary to prevent this. Otherwise, it could all end badly. Then she came across an article where it was written that the truth about the fall of Bishop's store was revealed, and they found out what such a thing was done to Prince Hart. The girl thought of a way to put it all to good use. She then ran up to Baron Mato and asked him if he would like to go with her to find her father. The man wondered if she really wanted to go with him specifically. One of the people present exclaimed that the Baron seemed to like her, but maybe she wanted to go with someone else. The little girl grabbed Matu's finger and said that she only wanted to go with him and that she didn't want anyone else. On the way, the man said he was glad she had chosen him. Afterward, he asked how her affairs with His Highness had been lately. Hannelope looked at him with a naive look and asked him what exactly he was interested in her relationship with her daddy. The Baron laughed and replied that he was simply worried about her as a loyal vassal. If the little girl was in any trouble, she could easily turn to him for help and he would do his best. The girl stated that she and her daddy were fine, and he told her that he wasn't going to go east this time. May too immediately began to ask her to tell more details and ask a lot of questions about why the prince is not going to go there and that he and Abel quarreled because they always had such a trusting relationship. Our heroine answered that the saint herself did not want Reinhardt to go with her. The man wondered why. Hannelope explained that she did not want to accidentally harm Hart and also leave the little girl alone because the prince could be in danger if he went with her. The Baron exclaimed that she was indeed a saint and tried to be so caring to those around her. The girl thought to herself that the man was caught. Not so long ago, she told her father's vassals what the situation with the designers was really about. Each was told different versions. One that the girl stole her father's personal belongings, another that they deceived the prince and provided untrue information. And when our heroine today read a new article, she realized which one of them leaked all the information to this newspaper. She whispered in the Baron's ear that they had broken her father's precious thing, so he was very angry with them. That's why Maitu was the man. Suddenly, the little girl saw her father standing near the carriage and rushed to him with all her legs. The young man stroked his daughter's head and asked how she was doing. Smiling sweetly, Hannelope replied that all was well. Bowing, the man asked if His Majesty had done his business so quickly and had already gone back. Taking the little girl in his arms, the Lord said that the meeting would not start for a while yet, but then why is the Baron already hanging around? Me too, replied that he came early, so he decided to wait, and the others were already all in place. Besides, he was very interested in talking to the little miss. Hart replied that next time you need to come on time and have him pass that on to the others. Also have him remember that if he were to see his daughter too often, he might accidentally disappear. Maximus, who had heard all this, declared that it seemed the prince was becoming insane. Hart countered that he hadn't heard anything good from him lately. So if he was going to talk nonsense, he should shut his mouth. Then he turned to Hannelope and asked what he and Maitu had been talking about while they were walking around. The little girl sadly replied that she seemed to have made a mistake and asked if he remembered the day he got angry with the designer from the clothing store. She then added that the Baron had asked about what had caused the conflict back then. She didn't remember the chronology of the events of that day very well, so she told the man that her father had gotten angry with them because they had broken an item dear to him. It dawned on Maxim that that was exactly what the Red Ghost paper had said in today's edition. Reinhardt asked if the little girl had told anyone else the story, but Hannelope replied confidently that she had not. She had only explained everything to Baron Mato. The young man realized what a snake he had warmed on his chest, and who was involved in all sorts of gossip written in the publication, which did not give him a quiet life for a long period of time. The young man immediately began to ask what else they had talked about. The girl replied that it was about Asta, who was going to go to the eastern lands. She said that she did not need a prince on this trip, but the newspaper says otherwise. Hannelope doesn't want Hart to go so far away and leave her alone. Maxim asked what he should do. Let Reinhardt just give the order and he would immediately capture Maitu, but the prince replied that they need to hold off on that for a while. They would deal with him as soon as the man relayed the last information to the Red Ghost his daughter had said. The girl thought about the fact that Hart had realized her ingenious plan very quickly. It was necessary that the next article would say that Asta herself did not want to endanger Reinhardt, so she did not want to take him with her. That way, Abel would no longer be able to manipulate the press. Looking at the little girl, the gentleman said that for some reason she looked worse than before and asked if she was sure that she was not in pain, because from the outside it seemed that she was not feeling well. The girl exclaimed that she was fine, she was just very hungry and maybe it affected her appearance. She wondered to herself how he had guessed, for she had been feeling really bad lately. Her condition was deteriorating more and more each day. The little girl thought to prepare herself the necessary medicine, but the most important ingredient, namely the flowers of the morning butterfly, is nowhere to be found. It's not their time of year, so the girl can't do anything about it as this plant is almost impossible to get at the moment. The prince ordered Maxim to take care of the matter at once. The next day, the information that Hannelope had told the Baron was published. Abel could no longer control people's minds through the newspapers, so she traveled east with her other lover. Meanwhile, Baron Mato brought our heroine a candy and asked if she had any other interesting stories. After a little thought, the little girl pointed to the door and said that the prince had hidden something strange there. He looked so scary and strong, but Hanalep was trying to make friends with him, so he didn't seem so bad. The man thought to himself that he was very lucky to have this girl, because he could get all kinds of news from her all the time. Hanalope is a great informant and does most of his work, so he decided to go to that room and see what was going on there. But when he opened the door, the Baron saw Maxim in front of him, who immediately grabbed him, and Maytow shouted to let him go and what he was doing here. After that, the little girl never saw the Baron again, but today she would finally meet the only princess in the Empire. It was the Duchess Moltke. She was the Emperor's favorite younger sister and Hart's aunt. This is the only person who is able to somehow establish relations between the son and the father. Therefore, for the sake of the future plans of our heroine, she needs to get into the confidence of the princess, whatever it takes. The woman immediately stated that she does not like to waste time, so their communication they will start with a test in order to understand the level of development of the baby. Sitting down at the table, Hanalope thought that she had heard that she was a very formidable girl, so it was necessary to be careful with her and not to give a reason for anger. Throwing the books on the table in front of the girl, the Duchess stated that no matter how much Hart would persuade her, the woman would not tutor a talentless child. The prince had reported to her that Hanalope's mother had been quite intelligent, and she hoped her talents had been passed on to the little girl. As she began writing on the blackboard, the Duchess added that if she wanted to become a member of the imperial family, she would need to learn the Plank language by heart. All nobles should ideally know it and speak it fluently. Our heroine thought to herself that she had read about this language in the original. It explained that only the imperial family learned the language to honor their ancestors. It was quite different from the current form of speech. Hanalope has never studied this language, but Moltke tries to explain everything quite lucidly, so the girl manages to digest all the material quite well. Having finished telling everything, the Duchess opened a book in front of the little girl and told her to perform all the tasks that are written on this page. The little girl was surprised because they had just started studying this material, and the woman had already decided to give her such difficult tasks. Noticing that the girl was confused, the woman asked what was wrong if she could not solve it. Hanalope thought to herself that if she honestly told her that she had no idea how to do it, then their acquaintance would immediately end before it began. But suddenly her attention was caught by a plant drawn in the book. It was a morning butterfly flower. When she was younger, she had read a lot about a variety of plants. Most likely their descriptions would be the same, regardless of the language the book was written in. It could also be that several people simply reprinted the same material. If everything turns out to be exactly as the little girl thinks, then there should be no problem with what is written. At the very beginning, the name of the plant is written a little lower, the family, origin, flowering time. Looking at all this, the little girl can confidently say that this is the material she studied earlier. Meanwhile, the woman said that as she thought, there was nothing special in the girl and was about to leave. But suddenly she heard Hanalope begin to recount a story about a morning butterfly flower from the family of flower butterflies native to the eastern continent. The Duchess stopped her and asked in surprise how she managed to translate all this. The little girl could certainly read it all if she thought hard enough, but how did she read the words she was seeing for the first time? Then asked who had been in charge of her education before. The girl answered honestly that she just liked those flowers, so she decided to pretend to translate the text. Moltke appreciated her ingenuity and said that she had chosen a very interesting way to fool her. After that, the woman softened a little and said that now they would learn this language gradually and properly. Hanalope realized that the princess would now become her full-fledged teacher and was very glad that she had managed to pass her test. Meanwhile, the prince in the corridor was nervous and did not understand why they were still not finished and if something had happened. Maxim calmed his highness and said that everything would be fine. As the door swung open, the woman muttered that Hart was standing here waiting, though there was absolutely no need. Reinhardt replied that his aunt had specifically come here to train his daughter, so how could he do otherwise? The Duchess said that usually the young man tried to avoid her when she came here to see him and kept saying that he was very busy. She thought to herself that she could not believe that her nephew had been waiting for her daughter at the door all this time. It was all very nice. After the young man left his beloved, Moltke seemed that together with her he lost all his emotions. Then the guy met Asta, but it was very noticeable that Hart did not have any feelings for her. Something was wrong. It seemed that his heart would break into even smaller pieces if he continued with this lifestyle. But perhaps this little girl could bring back the former young man and melt the ice. From that very day, Hanelope began to have special training from the Duchess. The woman taught her the royal gait, also the plank language, imperial etiquette, and many other things that could be useful during a meeting with the emperor. At the end of the next class, the girl remarked that the training was simply Spartan, but very interesting. The woman said that if the little girl had any questions, she could ask them, and Moltke would try to answer them all. Hanelope exclaimed that she was interested in something. Taking the canvas in her hands, she said that she could not read the map, and she would like to learn how to read it. Unfolding it, the woman noted that it was a picture of the southeastern part of the empire. The Duchess began to explain that they were now in the capital, but that if they followed one of the roads, they could reach Stofen, which was the largest port. Pointing to another palace, the woman informed them that her Moltke family's territory was there. In the empire, there are lands much better and more fertile, but her husband is very fond of this small piece of land, as well as the mountains that are there. Our heroine immediately asked where her husband was now. The Duchess was surprised at such a question, but replied that he must now go to Stofen on a business matter. The girl must be aware that the harvesting of the fruit of the morning butterfly flowers began in the summer. Import contracts have been signed for several years in advance, so preparations have already begun. The Duke tries to keep his business private, but it always brings in a large income. The family does not sell their goods to just anyone, so they conscientiously select customers. If the little girl wants, the Duchess can give her morning butterfly flowers as a presentation. Hanelope noted to herself that the woman treasures her husband very much. The piece said that she loved him very much. Simon Moltke is the eldest son in the family, but unfortunately his father, for some reason, then always neglected him and eventually disinherited him. All he had left was only a pleasant appearance. They got married even though the emperor didn't like the idea at all and was against it. Simon's only flaw was present. The young man was very greedy about money. The little girl felt sad that how could he cheat his wife, who treated him with such trepidation in such a way. It was simply horrible. Before it is not too late, it is necessary to tell the Duchess about the iron ore that the man mines in the mountains. Hanelope asked what road he usually took to get home. The woman pointed it out and added that her husband's favorite estate was there. He always comes back the same way, as it is very quiet and beautiful there. The little girl now understood the way in which he deceives his wife in order to get to Perosin. The little girl asked why so, for that road takes longer. The Duchess replied that it does. For example, other merchants are obsessed with the idea of earning as much as possible in a short period of time, but her man is not like that. Our heroine wondered to herself that doesn't he have to deal with the fruit of the morning butterfly flowers? After all, these are very capricious plants that spoil very quickly. In order to preserve from as long as possible, some merchants use a magic item that can maintain a certain temperature in the room. And in order to maintain this vessel, it needs to be fueled by a large amount of magic stones. Hanelope exclaimed that, does he really have so many stones to keep the fruit in proper condition for such a long journey? The woman replied that Simon said that a 2-year supply was enough to maintain the proper temperature. Hanelope countered that such a quantity was not enough and at least a 10-year supply was needed. The Duchess marveled that there could be no such thing, for her husband could not be mistaken in miscalculating. The little girl answered that it was true, for her mother had bought her a book in which it was written in detail, and she had studied the matter in detail. She thought to herself that her speculations were confirmed. Simon is using the purchase of the morning butterfly fruit as an excuse to trade iron ore. The Duchess muttered that, is he really lying to her for so long? She then asked if she still had that book, but the girl said that Uncle Sandy had sold it to a bookstore to make some money. The woman asked if she remembered where exactly he had sold it to. Hanelope replied that I think it was called the Blooming Bookstore. Then the girl asked why the Duke liked this mountain so much, if there were any treasures hidden there. The woman thought about it and answered that there is nothing like that there, only clean air and beautiful nature. Suddenly, however, something struck her, and she said that she was still thinking about why Simon was so attached to this small mountain, which did not even have any features. After that, she got off her seat and said that she had to run away immediately, as there were urgent matters. Our heroine was pleased that the princess had swallowed her bait, but will everything be all right now? A month later, Hanelope, along with Hart, arrived at the imperial palace. The girl had very mixed feelings and wondered if they would be able to get an audience with the emperor. After stroking the little girl's head, the young man asked why she was trembling so much. There was no need to be so worried, for that daughter was working hard on herself and studying. Hannelope began to cheer herself up, that indeed she had studied with the Duchess Moltke herself, and therefore she should definitely succeed. Standing in front of the doors to the throne room, her father asked her to wait a bit. He would go in to see the emperor first and then come back for her. Looking around, she noticed the other children and thought that their parents must have come to see His Majesty and brought their heirs with them. The girl was confused as to how to make conversation with them, as it had been a long time since she had interacted with someone her own age. When she noticed the boy standing aside, Hannelope wondered why he was standing there alone, as if he were a hermit and did not communicate with anyone. From the back, he looked very familiar to her. Then she guessed who he was and decided to go over and ask him how he was doing. It was Brentley, the same bastard the girl had defended in front of his father. When he saw who was standing in front of him, the boy turned away silently for some reason. The little girl asked him if he had forgotten her. "It's her, Hannelope." The girl began to wind circles around him and try to make conversation. She said it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. Then she asked if he had used the medicine she had given him for his bruises and if he had come here with his parents. But Brentley answered her nothing, and she couldn't understand why he was pretending to see her for the first time. So she asked if the boy didn't want to talk to her. But the bastard quietly asked her to move away from him, for if she spoke to him, she would be hurt too. The little lady did not understand what Brentley was talking about, so she asked him what he meant. She then noticed his wrist where there was a huge bruise and noted that it hadn't been there before. The girl immediately started examining the new bruise and asking where he had gotten that bruise. Suddenly, a boy's voice came from the side and asked what she was doing there. Looking at the disgruntled faces of the children who had gathered around them, Hannelope couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then asked Brentley that maybe it was necessary to say hello to them first and introduce herself. The little boy asked why she was even bothering with this bastard. Couldn't she smell the rotten odor from him? Let him better go to them. Then he introduced himself and said that his name was Jacob Eisen, the heir of the Eisen family. Our heroine realized that, so this is the second son of the Duke who was born after an illegitimate. The man was very dear to him and immediately began to neglect his firstborn. The piece said that after Brentley was sacrificed, Jacob became the rightful heir to the title. But at this point, Brentley is still the official heir. Could it be that Jacob is the one behind the abuse of this boy? I can see why he asked her to stay away. It was because he didn't want her to get hurt by him. After a little thought, the little girl replied that she had not the slightest desire to go to them. Jacob asked her why. Hannelope stated that he had a nasty temper, no patience, and she didn't think he was worthy of being the next Duke. Then, pointing to Brentley, she added that, compared to him, he has absolutely no disadvantages, and plus he is also handsome. Jacob was angry, and he swung his fist at her, saying that he had tried to persuade the girl to join them, and she had said some nasty things to him. Brentley stood up for her and covered her, saying that Hannelope was not guilty of anything, so let him not touch her. She went up to him to gloat and tell him not to dare breathe the air here. The boy in turn told her to get away from him if she didn't like it. Jacob asked if this was really true. The bastard replied that it was, and there was no need to touch her. With a nasty grin, the boy said that maybe then Brentley wants to take her place and get what he deserves. Our heroine immediately grabbed him by the arm and shouted for them not to dare touch him. The boy was already resigned to his fate and silently waited for the blow as the doors opened. Asta entered the room and said that she was glad to see everyone here. Then she sat down to hug Jacob and said that she had come back early to see her. The little boy replied that he missed her too. Hannelope was surprised that the saint had returned to the capital earlier than she had expected. Could it be that she had managed to find the necessary evidence so quickly? Asta asked the children present that they were probably meeting the little girl for the first time and had not encountered her before. The girl, after all, had been brought into her home by Prince Hart. She had lost her mother when she was a baby and was left alone. Hannelope doesn't know the nobility's customs at all yet, so let the boys take care of her and treat her with understanding. Then the saint said that she would go and say hello to His Majesty and let the children try to get along with each other. After hearing all this information, Jacob stated that, "Now I see why he and Brentley get along so well with each other. It's because they're pathetic bastards." Apparently this couple doesn't understand their places yet. Maybe they should all take turns hitting each of them to make things finally sink into their heads. Brentley covers Hannelope with himself again and tells her it's not her fault. She doesn't need to be touched. He was ready to take all the blows for himself. One of the maidens declared that how is it that she had done nothing wrong, for the little girl is as much a bastard as the boy. You cannot just take and pretend to be one of them. Our heroine thought to herself that there is a wisdom on this matter, which is passed down from generation to generation since ancient times. After that, she went forward to the insolent children. Yakov immediately snidely asked what happened. Did she decide to go out on her own and get first? But the little girl silently clamped her teeth into his arm, and the kid screamed in pain. She knew you had to know how to stand up for yourself, or you'd be a punching bag forever. That was the wisdom of it all. Jacob waved his hand and tried to pull her off of him, but nothing worked, so he yelled for her to let him go immediately. Hannelope replied that until he apologized, she would not let him go. The boy at first said that why should he apologize to the bastard, but then he said he would apologize anyway. Brentley asked fearfully how she was feeling. She replied that there was a salty taste in her mouth, but that she was fine. Then she turned to Jacob and said that she was waiting for the promised apology. The insolent kid replied that he wouldn't apologize. What made her think the boy would keep a promise to someone like her? Then he ordered the other children to grab her. They immediately pushed Brentley aside and held the little girl's hands tightly. Hannelope screamed that he was a pathetic liar. Jacob replied that lying to a bastard was not considered wrong, so he would do to her what she had done to him. Brentley pushed the nasty boy aside and shouted that he dared not do that to her. The boy had not expected such a turn, so he exclaimed that he was crazy. How dare he touch him? Brentley replied that he had asked him not to abuse the girl. Let her take her anger out on him. Suddenly the door swung open and a man's voice said that he had decided to look out because he heard some commotion. It was Emperor Robert von Reinhardt who exclaimed who dared to bring this beast into the imperial palace. Duke Eisen appeared next, who immediately shoved Brentley away from Jacob and began to lament how his little boy was feeling. The boy burst into tears and began to complain that it was all the fault of the dirty bastards. Eisen immediately turned to Brentley and asked how dare he treat his own son like that. Hannelope couldn't stand it and shouted that he was his son too, and the eldest, so why did he only listen to Jacob? The man immediately remembered this little girl, who ruined everything for him last time. Because of her interference, the Duke had to go through a lot, and now she decided to bother his son. The man hissed, how dare she put Brentley on the same level as Jacob? Then he realized that if he continued to talk like that, he would jeopardize his authority in front of the Emperor, because he should treat his children with respect, even if they were not his own. The girl shouted that she too was not some illegitimate daughter, but her father's child. Suddenly, Hart's voice sounded, ordering him to immediately remove his hands from Hannelope and let her go. The princess stated that judging from what the girl was saying, these kids had decided to bully her and Brentley by calling them illegitimate children. Eisen was outraged that it was who else was bullying who. Didn't they see what was going on? Brentley was the one who had plopped Jacob on the floor, and he was the source of all the trouble. Hart argued that it was his daughter who was being held by his hands like an intruder. The man began to try to make up his mind that they must have been trying to appease Hannelope and Brentley. Their Jacob is such a kind boy that he can't even hurt a fly. After which he looked menacingly at his bastard and said that, since he was the one who first started the fight, let him admit it. Brentley was very frightened, so he was confused and did not know what to say. But his father kept pressing him that the boy was standing before His Majesty the Emperor, so let him tell the truth and not hide anything. The boy had to reply that none of this was Hannelope's fault, it was all his fault alone. The Duke immediately started pointing his finger at him and saying that everyone present had heard it. Brentley confessed it all to himself. The little girl looked at him and mentally asked him why he would do such a thing now. Asta intervened in this conversation and said that there seemed to be only a minor altercation between the little babes. She doesn't think the Emperor should be concerned about it. Abel thinks that such an issue could be solved if the kids just apologize to each other, or maybe she should punish them the way they sue. Robert replied menacingly that he was in a position to decide for himself whether he would care about the matter or not. They are all in the imperial palace. Those present cannot ignore such a thing, citing some petty quarrel. The Emperor wants and must get the truth. Then the man turned to Hannelope and asked for a detailed account of everything that had happened here. The little girl was frightened, as she had tried so hard to restore the relationship between Hart and Robert, and now it seemed that they had become even more estranged because of her. The prince noticed that the girl was nervous, so he stroked her head and told her not to worry, and to tell the truth as it really was. Hannelope looked him in the eyes and asked him to put her on the ground. After that, she thought that Hart was really right. It was necessary to just put out the whole truth and not be afraid of anything. The girl told the emperor that Jacob and the other guys bullied them and called them illegitimate children, and Brentley was only trying to protect her. Robert looked at her and said that she had come to his palace for the first time and had already made such a mess. He then asked what made her think the man would believe her. The little girl replied that she was ready to swear on her life. She was telling the pure truth. The emperor was outraged that how could she swear on her life, and what did she even know about it? Hannelope looked at Hart and replied that all she knows is that if she dies, she won't be able to see her daddy anymore, and she doesn't want that. That's why she cares about her life. Robert replied that it was clear to him, and now it was Jacob's turn to tell his side of the story. The girl said that they bullied her and is even willing to put her life on the line for that claim, and is the kid ready to do the same? The boy was so nervous that he could not find what to answer and just fainted. The children immediately began to cry and admit their guilt, saying that they didn't want to do all this, but Yakov had made them do it. The emperor replied that he would discuss the matter directly with their parents. Then he turned to Eisen and told him to take the children to their parents quickly, and a little later they would discuss the situation together. Brentley followed his father and told Hannelope that they would definitely see each other again. Robert grabbed his head and said that he didn't have the strength to stand anymore, so he offered to go back to his room. The princess replied that they would do as His Majesty pleased. Hannelope noticed that the emperor was walking with a cane and had a strange gait. Suddenly the man lost his balance and fell sharply to his knees. Surrounding people did not have time to pick him up under his arms. After a while, the emperor was put to bed to make him feel better. In the work, about this time, Robert began to have severe headaches, the cause of which no one could find out. Only Asta's crony named Shin could provide some relief from this wild pain. For this reason, the emperor tried to keep Abel close to him. The young man said that His Majesty shouldn't worry so much, as everything would be fine. Rumors had already begun to spread among the people that the saint had found the essence of all living things. Patrick added that it was also rumored that she had traveled a long way to find a cure for Robert. The princess wondered if Abel had really found the essence of all living things. Smiling, Asta replied that God had heard her prayers, so he had helped in the search. Their scientists had already recognized the divine essence of this substance. Shin said that the emperor had been eating only raw food since yesterday, so the drink couldn't harm his body in any way, and one could not worry. The Duchess leaned towards Robert and worriedly said that it was some unknown substance. It should be thoroughly studied first. The man replied that it was the saint who had provided him with a doctor who could ease his suffering a little. She had saved him, so there was no reason not to trust her. Especially, it wasn't ordinary water in his hand, so it shouldn't affect him negatively. After that, the emperor drank the divine liquid to the bottom, hoping to be saved. He then turned to Hart and stated that although he had traveled a long way, he was out of luck. Today was not a good time, so let him just go back home. The Duchess asked Robert to accept, at least her short greeting, because Hannelope really wanted to meet him and had been preparing for a long time. The man asked what the little girl thought about it, whether she would like to have an audience right here. The little girl replied that resting the emperor was much more important than her greeting right now. However, the little girl had prepared a gift for him for today, so she asked if she could give it to him as she thought it might be very useful. Robert was surprised and replied that he even wondered what those little hands had prepared for him. Opening the small suitcase, the emperor saw a considerable number of round objects that resembled candy. He then asked what they were. Hannelope explained that they were pills that strengthened health. The girl had created them on her own, just for the purpose of giving them to His Majesty. The man cautiously sniffed the medicine and noted that the smell was quite unusual. Shin exclaimed that these pills were made by an ordinary child. If he ate even one, it could have a negative effect on his body. Robert replied that there was no need to worry, for he had heard that it was this little girl who was able to help the saint awaken quickly when she had lost consciousness and couldn't come to her senses for a long time. Then the emperor praised the girl for her efforts and said not to worry, he would soon send her a formal invitation to an audience. Hart's voice rang out in the bedroom, asking her to remember to summon him as well next time. Hannelope noted that before, Reinhardt had felt uncomfortable even being in the same room with his father, so he had tried to avoid seeing him. But now, things seemed to have changed a bit, really. He had asked this for her sake. Robert appreciated it and said that for him this phrase was obviously worth a very big effort, so he would do it. The prince thanked him and replied that he would take his word for it. The next morning, a messenger was sent to our heroes with a message that it was necessary to arrive at the imperial palace immediately. But this was not to settle their matter of audience. The emperor had gotten drastically worse during the night, occasionally losing consciousness and almost unable to get out of bed. Shin immediately started accusing them that it was because of the pill they had given yesterday. It was Prince Hart's daughter who gave the medicine to His Majesty. Everyone began to suspect the little girl of being responsible for Robert's deteriorating condition. Reichardt said that he personally saw the emperor not take the medicine yesterday. Shin stated that they had done research on the pills and learned that they were poison. To cause symptoms, all it takes is inhaling the powder deposited here. The emperor was getting better after Asta gave him divine water, but these particular pills had a bad effect on Robert's body condition. The prince abruptly grabbed him by the collar and advised him to think before making such harsh statements. Is he sure about his analysis? For some reason he did not believe it well, especially after the words of the pharmacists he knew. Asta said that he might find it hard to believe, but a poisonous substance had been found in the emperor's vomit. The young man was taken aback by the information he heard, so he let Abel's ward go. Saint stated that she didn't want to believe such a thing, but it was difficult for her to treat Hannelope without suspicion. Hart exclaimed whether she was implying that his daughter had purposely slipped poison to His Majesty. The girl replied that the little girl was very good at pharmacology, was she not? After all, it was she who was able to awaken her from a dream that could not be dispelled by a large number of other doctors. Those present began to discuss that rumors had reached them that Hart's daughter was very good in medical sciences, but how would the child be able to comprehend it all? They are also aware that the relationship between the prince and his father, the emperor, has been very bad for a long time. Reinhardt replied that he was not going to stand silently and listen when such people tried to accuse his daughter of attempted murder, only because of some incomprehensible speculations with no evidence. The emperor coughed and said that the prince didn't seem to care much about his father. He then looked at Hannelope and said that he wanted to ask her directly if she had given him those pills, knowing what would happen to him next. The little girl replied that she had. He felt a similar effect after just touching this medicine. The emperor shouted, who ordered her to do such a thing, let her answer him immediately. The girl replied that she did it of her own free will, as she knew of his illness and was trying to cure His Majesty. The man asked why she had chosen to remedy his state of health in this way. Hannelope replied that at the very least he would soon be better. When the little girl picked up one of the pills she gave to the emperor, Hart became nervous and shouted her name loudly, trying to stop her. But the little girl replied not to worry him. Nothing will happen to her, even if she eats a Gemenia these pills. After that, our heroine defiantly ate one of them in order to demonstrate their safety. Then she explained that these pills are made to flush out all the harmful substances accumulated over the years from his body. They are completely harmless, so they can be taken without fear. There were too many toxins in the emperor's body, but now that they were out, the man should soon feel better. She thought to herself that it was a pity that her illness could not be cured by them. Then she added that the more he threw up, the easier it would get. If everything goes as it should, he will get better very soon. The man asked in surprise if she meant to say that the poison that was in his vomit was something that had been accumulated over all the years of his life. Hannelope replied that was correct. The emperor asked how long it would take to get all the toxic substances out of his system. The little girl exclaimed that only one day. Already from tomorrow, he would feel like a completely different person. Robert stated that it meant that his headaches were a consequence of the accumulation of harmful toxins in his body, and that was why Hannelope had decided to give him such pills. The girl replied that yes, because she had heard that the emperor blushed sharply, felt pressure in his chest, and constantly drank large amounts of water. His Majesty immediately asked how she knew all this if Hart had told her everything. The little girl explained that his body was quite hot, hence the elevated temperature. She had also heard about him taking red phoenix root periodically as a medicine. The emperor had confirmed that it was the one that helped him with his headaches. Hannelope replied that it was contraindicated to take it for fever. Shin immediately began to justify that such speculations are only spread by those who don't understand anything about medicine. In order to feel any side effects, this root must be taken in huge quantities. This erroneous information was spread among the people. The girl replied that, yes, and that is why one should only give the emperor as much as he needs. The boy exclaimed that after making such statements, let her demonstrate what amount of root she would give Robert. Taking the jar of this medicine in her hands, the little girl was silent as she found something strange. Hanalope sensed some impurities, as if too much caffeine had been added. A small amount of phoenix root could relieve headaches, but exactly 1 pill from this jar was equal to a ton of root taken. Since His Majesty took these pills every day, there was no way his temperature could drop. The little girl felt this when she first met the Emperor. It was as if there was a real fire burning in his body. She remembered that the piece said that the Emperor's headache was only a minor symptom. Shin was only pretending to try to cure him, but in fact was only making his health worse. And then there was someone who decided to cure him with the divine water she found. As a result, the headaches, which were not life-threatening, began to increasingly affect Robert's daily life. Anyone in his shoes would do anything to get rid of it. The young man cried out that how could she speak of such things with such confidence, having only tasted it a little. These roots brought from the Far East, and so much is unknown about them, so how does the girl know so much information about them? The Emperor said that in that case, the other pharmacists should be called in to be his judges. After that, they would find out exactly who had actually worsened the condition of his body. He then ordered the guards to capture Shin and keep him in the dungeon for now. Asta tried to address His Majesty, but he waved her away and told her to leave as he needed rest. Hart took the little girl in his arms and said that in that case they would go too. Robert replied that he had the impression that his son had been waiting all along for the moment when he would tell him to go. The young man replied that at this hour his daughter was usually asleep, and now he would have to put her to bed again. The Emperor exclaimed that his daughter's sleep was more important to the prince than the state of his father's health. The young man replied that this was true. For him, his own child was the most precious thing in this life. Already in the corridor, Hanalope began to resent that how could Daddy even say such a thing? The young man replied that it was impossible to tell lies right in the face of His Highness. The little girl looked at him and did not understand where in a man can appear so much equanimity. A few days later, while sipping tea, the Emperor announced that Shin had been executed and his body would be fed to the crows. Covering Hanalope's ears, Hart resented the fact that his daughter was only 7 years old. Robert countered that as a member of the imperial family, she should not know the truth. Regardless, the girl was happy that His Majesty was feeling better after the medicine she had prepared. Shin had a large number of enemies among the members of the imperial family since he followed Abel and committed all the atrocities she asked him to do. Even when prescribing medicine to Robert, no one else was allowed to interfere. Other pharmacists double-checked all the medications and confirmed that Hanalope's words were true. It was also discovered that the divine water Asta had offered was completely ineffective. The Emperor reported that not only did the terrible headache go away, but he also felt lightness in his body. He added that this was despite the fact that he had vomited 3 times as soon as he went to bed. He still had to suffer a bit for this improvement. Then he looked menacingly at Hanalope and told her that she would have to be punished for this. Our heroes did not understand what His Majesty was saying, for the medicine had helped him and improved his health. The man snapped his fingers and a large number of gifts materialized in front of the guys. Robert said that this was her punishment. She should take everything. A little later, the father of one of the boys who took part in the bullying asked for forgiveness from Hanalope for that day because his son is still quite stupid, after which he told the boy to bow his head and apologize. The boy sobbed and said that it was all because of Jacob's order. Hart thought to himself, what kind of apology is that? Earl Farrington should be properly engaged in the upbringing of his heir. Hanalope thought to herself that they all laughed at her, calling her illegitimate, and now, understandably, after the Emperor recognized her, everyone immediately came running with apologies. It turned out that there was a very good reason why Reinhardt had put up with all the trouble in order for her to be granted an audience. The young man noted that all the apologies were just awful and these children were extremely ill-mannered. A voice came from behind the door to announce that Mr. Brentley from the Duchy of Eisen had arrived. Hearing this name, our heroine was very happy. A little later, the children were sitting at a table strewn with various desserts, but the boy asked in surprise what it was all about. The little girl replied that they were appetizers. Brentley turned to Hart and said he wanted to apologize instead of Jacob. Taking a piece of cake, Hanalope began pulling her fork to the boy's mouth and telling him to taste it. The prince objected that the boy was perfectly capable of eating on his own. The girl replied that she knew that, but wanted to feed him personally. Brentley took the plate and said that he could indeed eat by himself. Then he added that it was very tasty, and it was the first time he had tasted it. He then asked why such generosity all of a sudden. Hanelope replied that he had protected her in the imperial palace from those evil children, so she was just grateful to him. The boy said that it is not worth it because he almost got into trouble because of her. Let the girl next time just pretend not to know him, because if they become friends, it will be very hard. The girl replied that he's a master fighter. Let him just kick them next time if she again will bully. She thought to herself that Brentley had a strong skeleton. If he could get his head together and learn to control his mana, he'd make a fine master, and then Duke Aizen wouldn't be able to humiliate him anymore. Then she said she would help him and held out a bracelet as a gift. The boy looked at it in surprise and said that it looked quite expensive, but he didn't understand why he needed it. The little girl explained that there was a wizard who lived in Turenpol who was very fond of expensive jewelry. Brentley asked if she wanted him to go to him, give him this bracelet, and ask him to teach him magic. The girl smiled and replied that he was very clueful. Hart walked over to Hanelope and quietly said that it was time for the boy to go home. Brentley immediately bowed and thanked him for his hospitality. Afterward, he told Hanelope that they would see each other later. The little girl wondered why the prince did that, if he didn't like this boy just because he was the son of Duke Aizen. After a while, Hanelope, along with Hart, was invited to the imperial palace. In the throne room, they saw Asta, who said she was sure Robert would call her again. She believed that she would not be kicked out, because His Majesty was the only point of contact between the temple and the imperial family. The little girl didn't understand what was going on, for she thought Abel had been banned from the place. After evidence was found that Shin was to blame for the emperor's deteriorating health, he was immediately executed. Asta's reputation drastically deteriorated since the young man was her subordinate, and everyone assumed she was complicit. Our heroes entered the throne room and greeted His Majesty. The saint clearly did not expect to see them there. Robert stated that everyone was now assembled. He called Abel here as there had been some misunderstanding, after which he said one word, apologize. Asta immediately smiled and replied that it was fine. The most important thing was that the emperor hadn't lost trust in her. She cannot accept an apology from a child, as it is inherent for children to make mistakes. His Majesty exclaimed, "What is she even talking about? It is the saint who needs to ask for forgiveness from Hanelope." It turned out that day all the children confessed to what had happened. It all started after Asta called Hart's daughter an illegitimate child in front of everyone, thereby giving them a reason to attack. Robert continued that since he recognized the child, it turns out that Abel insulted the imperial family. There would be no punishment for that, after all. She has a good relationship with the temple, but she should apologize and bow her head properly. The saint was stunned at what she heard and could not find anything to say, but the emperor told Hanelope to come closer to him. Robert pointed to the seat beside him and invited her to sit down. On the way, the little girl wondered what was even going on. After all, the emperor was not attached to anyone but his own sister. So what had changed? The emperor turned to Abel again and stated that if she didn't want to apologize and decided to choose punishment for herself, then he appreciated her decision. Gritting her teeth, Asta apologized to the princess and said that she had acted recklessly in offending her. The girl had no thoughts of hurting her, so she asked her to pardon and forgive her. Robert looked at Hanelope and clarified if she accepted her apology. The little girl smiled and said that she liked Abel. She wouldn't treat the girl badly. She thought to herself that all of this was enough to bring Asta down to earth. The emperor stated that the princess had forgiven her, so the girl could get away. But the saint replied that she wanted to say something else out of respect for His Majesty. Duke Moltke is planning an uprising. When Abel went in search of divine water for Robert, she passed through the Parison territory, which belongs to Simon. There, she accidentally discovered that the Duke is secretly mining iron ore, which he then sells to arms dealers. Everything looks like preparations for a riot are underway. Asta has proof if Robert allows it, the girl will show him the iron ore from Parison. Witnesses can be her escorts at the time, as well as the miners who work there. The girl realized that in a hurry, Abel had decided to take this opportunity to restore her lost reputation. Robert replied that her act could lead to the disappearance of the Moltke family because Simon is his supporter, and the Duchess is the only younger sister. They might now perish. The girl exclaimed that to her, as a loyal subject of this empire, Robert's welfare was far more important than the Moltke family. The emperor looked at her with a menacing look and said that he was already aware of all this. The former ruler had gone head over heels and killed all of his brothers in order to come to power. All of his children he constantly forced to compete with each other in order to leave only the most deserving. In order to survive, the emperor's children had to fight each other with swords. Robert von Reinhardt emerged victorious from the battle. Afterward, he informed his father that he had done as he wished, but let him not be forced to commit such follies again. The man replied that the young man was not yet ready to become his heir, for there was still his sister left. The young man cried out in horror that, for Jopi was only 5 years old. The ruler replied that he could only become emperor when he was able to cut off subsequent troubles in peace. Then Prince Robert cold-bloodedly brought down with his sword the head of his father, who had made everyone live in such a hell for so long. The girl was very surprised that he was aware of the machinations with the iron ore, for he had told her nothing about it. The emperor asked irritably that she thought he was obliged to report to her. Asta exclaimed that iron ore is the material for weapons. Simon sends it to arms dealers. It's a plot for a riot anyway. Robert replied that he knows what's next. He owns the mine anyway, so what's the problem? Not long ago, Moltke's family came to him to repent of their sins. Simon is obsessed with money, so he secretly mined iron ore. This was all accidentally found out by the Duchess. Listening to this, the little girl was glad to herself that everything was going according to her plan. A few days ago, during her training, Hannelope had started gently questioning Joppy about Simon's dealings in Parasan. The woman said that her husband was running a mine that the emperor had banned, though the child still wouldn't understand it. The girl advised her to confess everything honestly and sincerely ask Robert's forgiveness. The woman replied that it all seemed so simple in words, but even if she confessed, His Majesty would not believe her words. The price of such a sin would be very high. Then Hannelope said that let them offer this mine to the emperor. After all, he will find out about it during the confiscation anyway. So before he finds out for himself, let them tell him the truth and present it to him. Be caught in the act and have the mine confiscated, or discover the truth and gift it. These are all very different things that can change the course of events. Jopi replied thoughtfully that paying for his sins by sacrificing a mine that should already be confiscated was a very good way out. The little girl took a promise from the princess that such a thing would not happen again. After this conversation, all rights to the property were transferred by Duke Moltke to the emperor, along with a relinquishment of commercial rights to it. Robert told Asta that he had given her a pass that allows her to enter any land in the empire unhindered in order for her to get him the medicine he needs. Instead, she's doing something he doesn't understand. He never thought a saint was capable of such a thing. It turned out that the divine water was fake. Now she also tried to frame his sister. The girl apologized and replied that it was a great impudence on her part. The emperor sighed that after all she was a saint, then why wasn't she aware that His Majesty needed to be careful? After which he ordered her to leave his palace. The girl did not even object, so silently turned around and headed for the exit. The girl noted to herself that the original story had been completely changed. Abel could not fool Hart and Robert and execute Duke and Duchess Moltke. Now she would not be able to use them to sacrifice them for her own self-serving causes. Hannelope's plan worked, and she managed to protect her family from this intruder. The emperor turned to the little girl and said that he had called her into the courtyard to apologize to her, and it turned out that he had succeeded in surprising her as well. He thought she was a child, a monster who had fooled Duchess Moltke with her advice, but it turned out that she was only a child. Hart entered the conversation and asked what advice his daughter was talking about. Robert was surprised that the prince did not know and explained that, thanks to the girl, Jopi and Simon managed to avoid execution. Hannelope thought to herself that Reinhardt must not have known about it, because everything happened during the lessons alone with the princess. When our heroes were about to leave the palace, the prince took the little girl in his arms and noticed that she did not look well, so he asked her how she was feeling. The little girl replied that she was fine, but then she felt really bad and fainted. When Hannelope opened her eyes, she saw her father talking to the doctor, who said he was unable to cure her. Hart said he would give him a sum of money, if only he would make her well. The little girl called to the prince in a weak voice, and he immediately rushed to her bedside. The girl asked if she had slept long. The boy excitedly replied that she had. The healer asked if such a thing had ever happened to the little mistress before. Hannelope did not answer anything and asked her father that they should be alone with him as she had something to confess to him. After her daughter told him that she had a secret, the young man sat down on the edge of the bed and replied doomedly that he knew she was ill, after which he asked why she had been silent. The girl did not expect him to be angry, apparently just realized that there was a use for her. It turned out that she had a terrible genetic disease, which is very unpleasant and burdensome. The little girl apologized to him and told him she would never cheat on him again. The young man took her by the shoulders and asked her why she was apologizing to him and why being sick was something bad for her, for which she felt guilty. Hannelope replied that when she is sick, she annoys him. Plus, her illness is hard to treat, so she decided to keep quiet. But don't let her father worry. Laura has done a lot of research and experiments on various treatments. So, after gathering all the necessary ingredients, she will be able to prepare the right medicine. If he manages to find the fruit of the morning butterfly flower, the girl will do everything herself and will not bother him. She will become useful to him and will help him in everything. Hannelope doesn't want to die, so let her help her one more time. Hart pulled her against him and replied that she should have told him everything earlier. Does he still not deserve her trust? The prince didn't bring her to the palace to do anything for him or help him in any way. He is her father and she is his daughter. That's the only reason and nothing more. So if she's worried about something, she should tell him right away. He couldn't protect Laura and now he will never let his child go. The little girl noted that Hart is different. As a father, he is very worried about his daughter. After his speech, the prince asked her to talk about her illness. Meanwhile, rumors spread in the temple that the emperor had forbidden Asta to appear in the palace. Could it be true that she tried to frame the Moltke family? Now, because of her, the relationship between the temple and the imperial family can become very tense. In one of the rooms, the girl saw her father and asked him what he was doing here. The man replied that it was because of their family's business problems with the emperor. Now that she was forbidden to enter there, their business was in danger of being disrupted. Asta resented that it was necessary to talk to her first instead of going straight here. The guardian objected that there was nothing to talk about with someone whom His Majesty had banished from his palace. Abel realized that people had decided to use her and then just throw her out. All of them had become sharply dismissive of her. It seemed she would have to ask Godpratch for help again. The temple abbot asked everyone to calm down, for he had a great idea. The saint thought to herself what kind of ideas this old man had, for he was pathetic and in poor health. The old man said that, from what he had heard, Asta could have succeeded if it wasn't for Prince Hart's daughter. To date, all of the obstacles in Abel's path, in one way or another, had to do with that child. His Holiness added that he had decided to invite His Highness' daughter to the main temple. Meanwhile, Hart brought Hannelope a box, and she could not understand what it was, so she asked if it was candy. But the prince answered that it was the fruit of the morning butterfly flower. The little girl was very surprised at what she heard. These fruits are considered a luxury item, and their supply is controlled by the imperial family. Without official authorization, their delivery is forbidden. The girl could not believe her eyes that she received so many of them, because this task, even for Hart, was not easy. Having opened the box, the girl made sure that there were fruits as snow-white as the first snow, and convinced that it was exactly what was needed. Hannelope was surprised to ask how he managed to get them, but her father told her not to worry about it, and to prepare her medicine to get well as soon as possible. The little girl began to worry that her father had to go on a crime spree to get them illegally. Maxim said that the prince had put so much effort into it that if the girl found out about it in detail, she'd just be shocked. Hart ordered him to shut his mouth. Our heroine immediately rushed to hug her father and apologize for making it so difficult for him because of her. Reynard got down on one knee and told her to stop apologizing every time for his help, because they are one family. He just needs her to be healthy and well. Hannelope was very touched that he was going through the ordeal and putting up with everything for her. Finally, all the ingredients were gathered. They were the highest quality materials, as well as the fruits of the morning butterfly flowers that were so hard to get. The girl was already trained in its preparation, as she had failed to finish it 100 times due to missing parts. She had also studied the recipe thoroughly and memorized everything. She only had to add the last substance and everything would be ready for use. The little girl should definitely succeed because this recipe was invented by her dear mother. When the girl added berries, from the cauldron fell thick smoke, which was different, because earlier, when cooking, there was also an explosion. When the color changed to bright yellow, Hannelope rejoiced as everything was exactly as Laura told her. Realizing that she had succeeded, the little girl immediately began to greedily drink the prepared mixture. Hart said that he had collected all the scattered mana in one place as she had asked and was ready to help her. Then he put his hand on her shoulder and told her to concentrate. And just then, she would be able to feel one huge stream of light and warmth. After a moment, the girl opened her eyes and reported that Hart had succeeded. The prince noticed that the color of her face had changed and asked if that was all the cure was all about. Hanalope replied that yes, it was. Now she needs to take this medicine for some time. But she already felt that the pain and shortness of breath were gone. Then she rushed to hug him and said that after that she could stay with her daddy for a long time. She was almost cured thanks to him, because it was the prince who managed to get the necessary fruit. The young man pressed his daughter against him and replied that he was very happy that he was able to save his own daughter. During the class, Joppy noted that Hanalope looked better and her face was full of vitality. In addition, she seemed to be a little tanned. The girl exclaimed that her father had built a greenhouse for her, and now she went there every day to take care of the plants. It has been exactly 1 month since our heroine prepared a medicine that treats genetic diseases. She continued to take it every day, and the pain gradually disappeared. A little more time is needed for full recovery, but Hanalope has nothing to worry about. The Duchess said that it's already getting warmer, and soon the morning butterfly flower will be delivered, but unfortunately she won't be able to keep her promise. This year some crazy person has stolen all the contracts for these flowers. The woman heard that even to sign a new contract she had to pay a heavy fine. Now His Majesty will be attentive because this plant was brought secretly to hide from the eyes of the imperial family. Hanalope thought to herself that it was very strange, because Hart had given her a few fruits of this flower not long ago, so how did he manage to get them? Out loud, she asked if it was possible to get some fruit before these shipments started. The princess replied that not usually, except by smuggling. The little girl was nervous that Hart had gotten them that way, for then, when he handed them over, he avoided answering the question of where he had gotten them, and now he might go to jail for her. The prince entered the room and said that his aunt should have warned him of her coming. Joppy parried that she had come to see Hanalope, not him. Then she said that the emperor keeps calling his daughter to the palace, but why Reinhardt keeps refusing. Is it not because Robert wants the child to be accepted into the Imperial Academy? The little girl was very surprised and didn't understand what it was about at all. This is an educational institution, a place where not only nobles but also ordinary people receive various kinds of education, as well as study magic techniques. At the same time, the Academy trains the Emperor's personal guard to fight in the Great War, so this place, Robert pays a lot of attention to. Hanalope didn't know any special details, as it was only mentioned in passing in the piece. Reinhardt replied that he would never send her there. The daughter would not be educated in that educational institution. Joppy reminded him that the girl was still expected at the main temple. It's an invitation from His Holiness. The young man will not be able to refuse so easily. The only reason, as an excuse, can only be the busyness of preparing for the academy. It would have to be one of two choices. The boy replied that he was against both options. He understands that the imperial family and the temple want to use Hanalope to spy on each other. The prince is not going to involve his daughter in political games. The little girl thought that she does not want to enter the academy, but she needs to get closer to the emperor. Cannot be any other way. But all worries were in vain, because after a few days Robert took her himself. The man said that they had not seen each other for a long time. He called her more than once, but in response there was only silence. Robert was beginning to think she was dead. Hanalope apologized for making him wait so long because of her ill health, and now she would visit him more often. She wondered why the emperor had decided to talk to her without Hart and what he wanted to tell her. Taking a sip of tea, Robert said that if the little girl entered the academy, they would be able to see each other more often, because it was very close to the imperial palace. The girl was surprised that he decided to declare his intention so bluntly. Then he added that it would be very nice if Hanalope became a great sorceress for him. Our heroine was confused by the fact that the man, even with her career, has already decided. She did not understand how to be, because if you leave everything as it is at the moment, you can lose the trust of the emperor. He needs not just a smart granddaughter, but someone who will become a powerful wizard and will be able to resist the temple. This will be very useful to strengthen his power. But the little girl doesn't even know how to practice mana. It's only enough to protect her heart in the case of an inherited genetic disease, so using magic is out of the question. Noticing that the pause was lingering, Robert said that he had heard from his little sister that the girl liked the fruit of the morning butterfly flower. Penelope didn't understand why he suddenly decided to bring it up, but the man went on to say that although it was not yet time for the official importation period, it had come to his attention that Hart had received a large quantity of the fruit. Did the little girl know how her father had managed to bypass the official procedure? Now the girl understood everything. The emperor had just learned that the prince had obtained the morning butterfly flower fruit through smuggling. Robert continued that how dare Reinhardt go against his majesty's will. The fellow should be thrown into a snake pit or sent to feed the sharks. Hanelope, who visualized this picture in her mind, felt sick to her stomach. The girl had tears in her eyes and said that it was all because of her whims. The emperor specified that it turns out that the little girl has to pay for it. Our heroine replied that, yes, and she is ready to be punished. The man put some paper on the table in front of her and said to sign it. Hanelope asked what it was, as she could not see anything because of the tears that filled her eyes. The emperor replied that it was a receipt that she had nothing against the punishment, so let her sign it. Robert exclaimed that it was not a signature but an incomprehensible drawing, but nothing. In the academy, the girl will learn to write correctly. Wiping her tears, Hanelope saw that she had signed the application for admission to the Imperial Educational Institution. The doors to the room opened abruptly and Hart appeared, who two servants tried to stop. He was very angry and shouted how His Majesty could do this to the girl. After all, he didn't even ask her. The young man quickly took her in his arms and asked what her father had done to her. The man calmly replied that his granddaughter had just signed the academy application on her own. Hart shouted that the emperor had said such things to her that she had burst into tears and signed her name. Did he dare to threaten her? Robert replied that the girl had done it of her own free will. The man only praised Hart in front of her for finding the fruits of the morning butterfly flower before the official season of importation. The prince replied that it was coming out that the emperor had decided to mock the child and tell her that the young man had committed fraud to deliver the fruit. Robert replied that he was merely asking if she was aware of the manner in which the lad had gotten them, then asked if it was fair that Hart had destroyed all the contracts for importing the fruit. The prince replied that it was not illegal. The emperor objected that then why did he use an anonymous representative? Didn't want the man to catch him or what? Reinhardt replied that he merely anticipated his behavior, so he reassured him. The emperor stated that he had had enough. He has nothing more to talk to Hart about. He wishes his granddaughter a pleasant time at the Imperial Academy. The girl personally signed the application, so there is no turning back. The little girl noted to herself that His Highness is a real tyrant, who is capable of doing anything for his own benefit. A little later, Hanelope apologized for being confused and signed it all. Hart replied that it was not her fault. It was the adult's fault for deceiving the child. He then asked if she thought the young boy had schemed to get the fruit illegally. The girl immediately began to deny it. The prince explained that he had indeed thought of smuggling, but suddenly an idea came into his head. When trading large quantities of goods, the other country usually has to provide samples. So the young man got them on the condition of a high payment and signing a big contract. Now the little one realized that he had legally obtained these fruits before the period of official importation. Hart then added that if Hanelope didn't want to study at the Imperial Academy, then let her just say so, and her father would do his best to make sure she never got there. The girl replied that it was fine. In fact, it should be much easier there than in the lessons of Duchess Moltke. She thought to herself that if she said no, there could be a rebellion and big problems with the emperor. Reinhardt replied that it was fine, but asked her to be sure to let him know if she changed her mind. Then Hanelope thought about getting to know children her own age at the academy, and she hoped that they would be quite different from the children of the nobles who bullied her. Then she wondered how Brentley was doing, since she hadn't seen him in quite some time. Meanwhile, the boy had been practicing sword fighting somewhere. Upon arriving at the Imperial Academy, Hart asked Sherry if she had put away all the supplies his daughter might need. The girl answered that she had, and opened her briefcase and began to show that there were handkerchiefs, snacks, and everything else that was necessary. The young man thoughtfully said that it was a pity they had not taken the magic item for communication. The maid countered that it was forbidden to bring them into an educational facility. Hart asked Hanelope not to be too nervous, as thanks to Duchess Moltke's training, the girl would quickly catch up with the local curriculum. If someone dares to offend her, let him quietly punish him because it is necessary to learn to cope with such things, and the rest will be taken care of by her father. The little girl took his words into consideration and said that this was exactly what she would do if anything happened. In the Imperial Academy, all students are divided into 3 classes, namely A, C, B, depending on their level of development. All students here are equal to each other, as there is no division into nobles and commoners. Also, in the same class, students of different ages can study. The only criterion that can separate children is ability. So it's no surprise if a 7-year-old child will study in Class A. Finding the classroom she needed, the little girl looked around and didn't understand where she could sit down. A boy immediately materialized in front of her and asked her who she was. It was too arrogant of her to enter the classroom and not say hello to him. The girl immediately shook his hand and introduced herself, asking his name in return. Pulling her hand out, the kid asked in surprise that she didn't want to say she didn't know who Woolly Fork was. From the other end of the classroom, Jacob started running towards them, shouting that this was the same illegitimate child who was sucking up to his majesty. After which he pointed at Woolly and said that he was the so-called head of the academy. How could a girl come here and not be aware of such important basics? The little girl remembered that in front of her was the only son of Marquis Fork and his wife, who are related to the imperial family. If one were to cross out the first line of the emperor's descendants, they could become the heirs to the throne as they stand at the top of the line. At the moment, Robert is in a protracted quarrel with his eldest son, Hart, but also does not appoint Patrick as heir to the throne. So everyone who has a drop of imperial blood expects to become one. But there's something more important than that. In the original work, Woolly decided to argue with Abel in order to impress Robert, but was wiped out by Asta's dodginess. The boy, as the head of the academy, whom the emperor considered ambitious and promoted in every way possible, lost with a big bang, allowing the saint and the temple to get even more proud. Fork then pointed his finger at Hanelope and said that she was flattering the emperor while she didn't even know her place. Was she proud of the fact that she was sent to the advanced class immediately after being accepted into the academy? She didn't think she could make a good impression on someone like him with her arrogance. The doors to the classroom opened and Professor Mennick walked in, asking why it was so noisy and if they had already met the new student. He then introduced Hanelope to everyone and informed them that she would now be studying with them, and the young man hoped that the boys would help her get into the program. Woolly immediately started to be hypocritical and said that of course he would help because he always does that with new students, so don't let the teacher worry. After that, Professor Mennick said that it was time to take their seats and start the learning process. The girl looked at the teacher and wondered why he didn't say anything to Fork because he could see that he was bothering her. The man asked what was wrong and told her to go sit down on his seat. Our heroine realized that he decided to pretend that he did not notice anything strange. Unexpectedly, her roommate on the desk said that all children in this way are trying to attract attention to themselves. Woolly always behaves this way in order to impress Professor Mennick because the man is a confidant of the emperor, so Fork out of his skin to show himself in a good light. After which she added that it was not worth paying attention to them because they were all shallow. Then the girl introduced herself and said that her name was Catherine Spiegant. Our heroine immediately replied that she was Hanelope von Reinhardt. She thought to herself that the new acquaintance is trying to comfort her, although a little rough, of course, but apparently she is not bad. The girl immediately said that she didn't ask her name, and if the little girl behaved childishly, she wouldn't let her sit next to her anymore. Hanelope thought to herself that this was not a consolation, but a warning. Our heroine began to remember where she had heard this name before, and it came to her that Catherine was the daughter of Margrave Spiegant. Princess Jopi had told her about the aristocratic genealogy. The Margrave was considered a prestigious nobleman with many merits, and his power was as strong as that of a duke. On top of that, he was an excellent wizard, and thanks to his supernatural abilities, the borders are secure. The man has 2 children who are twins, and it is popularly said that they also inherited their father's talent and have a predisposition to magic. The little girl wondered where her brother was now, for don't twins usually stick together? Meanwhile, the professor said that since they had a new girl, they would start by reviewing the basic curriculum at the Imperial Academy. The man said that this education was divided into 2 forms, then asked the class which ones. Willie immediately raised his hand and replied that it was divided into general education and magical education. The teacher explained that in the past the academy was only a general education, but a couple years ago the emperor decided to add magic training. Fork exclaimed that magic is a very important element of military capability, and plus, it plays a big part in people's lives. Minnick replied that was correct, and now they could continue where they left off in the last lecture. Today they will talk about the achievements of the current Emperor Robert in stabilizing the empire. The little girl thought to herself that Duchess Moltke didn't talk about this in her lessons. After the cruel ruler died at Robert's hand, the former emperor's treacherous officials had fled to a neighboring duchy. They collectively put a curse on the empire and caused a rebellion. But the rebels were unable to defeat His Majesty Robert. Those men used the tactic of kidnapping nobles to negotiate to try to get their way through blackmail, but the emperor did not respond in any way. Thanks to such determination, all the rebels were crushed. The little girl realized that riots, kidnappings, and abandoned hostages were all her Papa Hart's story. There were only 2 words about the Reinhardt incident: kidnapped noblemen. The young man had been tortured horribly, and during his escape he had suffered terrible headaches that made it seem as if his body was falling to pieces. Listening to the professor saying that, thanks to Robert's reasonable decision, they were now living in a time of peace and should be applauded, Hanelope was angry at one point. No one remembered, and nowhere was it mentioned how the prince took part in the overwhelming battle or how he was kidnapped in order to protect the knights under his command. Hart lived in agony afterward. Hanelope can't believe that everyone just forgot about it. How is that even possible? Putting her hand up, the little girl showed that she wanted to ask the professor one question. Getting approval, the girl asked what happened to the kidnapped nobles the rebels were holding. The teacher didn't really expect such a question, but bowed his head and quietly said that they had all died. Then he added that one of them had escaped, but it wasn't important information, so he wouldn't tell them. Then Willie turned to Hanelope and said to stop asking stupid questions because of her uneducatedness, because it prevents everyone else from studying. The girl began to get very angry because no one knows about it, and she became very offended for her father. Suddenly, Catherine took her hand and whispered that it turns out the little girl is not stupid. After all, she asks such questions that others cannot think of. The girl is very brave, and let her not be afraid even if Fork looks at her menacingly. Then she wrote on a leaf that Willie is always stopping everyone from asking questions because she wants to be the center of attention. Hanelope is brave after all, so let her teach him a lesson. The little girl didn't really understand what she was implying or what she needed to do. Meanwhile, the teacher said that the lecture is over and now they need to start the test. He hoped that all the guys would try well so as the final results, the man would hand over to the emperor. The girl was a little upset that she got to the test on the first day, but after reading the assignment she realized that they were going over this material with Duchess Moltke. A while later, Minnick looked over the papers and stated that such incomplete answers, it was even embarrassing to show His Highness. He then added that Willie had everything correct as usual, except for 2 answers. The other students immediately started saying how good he was, and that Fork would have the highest grade again. The boy stood up and began to thank the teacher for the fascinating lecture, and that thanks to him he got the highest grade. But the professor interrupted him and said that he didn't say anything about his high grades. Then he added that Hanelope had the highest grade, and all the students looked at her in surprise. The professor congratulated her and said that it was a great result. In the next class, Catherine laughed and said that the look on Willie's face was just unforgettable. Noticing Hanelope's strange look, the girl asked why she was staring at her like that. Our heroine replied that she was just wondering if she was going to sit with her at this lecture. Spigent replied that yes, but it's not because she likes Hanelope, let her not be conceited. The little girl clarified if there would be a lecture on magic now. Catherine answered that yes. They are studying various magic formulas and their use. Then she added that it is in this class that Fork attracts a lot of attention. Normal students use first or second circle magic, but Willie has third circle magic. Hanelope began to remember that in the novel it was said that he became the head of the academy thanks to a bribe. The girl thought he didn't have any skills in magic, and here it turns out he has a talent. And she herself has a limitation in the use of mana due to a genetic disease, and she will look silly in comparison to him. Catherine added that there was also an assistant professor named Richter who would be looking after them all the time. The name sounded familiar to Hanelope, and the little girl wondered if it would be exactly who she thought it would be. Meanwhile, a girl entered the classroom and announced that the lesson had already started, so everyone should take their seats. This was Anna Richter, who's a brilliant sorceress from the Commoners. In the original work, she plays quite a significant role. At the moment, she is working as Professor Frank's assistant. Approaching the podium, the man announced that today they would be studying growth magic. This pot contains a talking tree. It is very valuable to the Emperor. But now it has a withered appearance, so the guys will need to restore the flower's vitality using growth magic. It is impossible to revive a dead tree, but to bring a withered tree back to life is easy. To do this, it is only necessary to use the magic of the third circle. The little girl was upset that at the elementary level, everyone could only use the first and second circle, except Wooly, of course. Apparently, Professor Frank had arranged this lecture especially for this boy, and all the others were present only as extras. Having finished drawing the picture, the man said that now he would demonstrate how to start magic with the help of the formula. Then he glared at Anna and she reached out her hand to the withered tree. After a moment, a glow appeared around the plant, and it immediately took on a completely different appearance. Hannelope marveled, as she had never seen such a thing before, and it was something incredible to her. The professor said that there was nothing fantastic about it, but Miss Reinhardt seemed amazed at what she was seeing for the first time. The little girl immediately asked him to demonstrate something himself, because most likely he could do real miracles. The man immediately said that he didn't have time for that, so he would show something later. Catherine sighed that Frank always behaves like that, so everything shows only his assistant. In the meantime, Anna called the guys to come closer to try their hand at it themselves. Several guys immediately went into action, because they really wanted to show a good result. But one of them was immediately pushed away by Wooly and said that they had to stand here for half an hour for such a trifle. After holding his hand over the tree for a while, a small leaf appeared at the tip of one of its branches. The students immediately began to marvel at how good Fork was. Frank patted him and said that he didn't doubt him for a second, because Wooly was the hope of their Imperial Academy. The boy bowed slightly and replied that it was all for Robert's sake, because Fork wanted to be useful to him. Meanwhile, it was our heroine's turn to test her strength. The little girl glanced at the formula and thought that it was too long and ineffective, and it would be better to change one of the parts. Anna came up to her and said in an encouraging voice that she shouldn't worry so much, because everyone can make mistakes. Hannelope thought to herself that she was right. She was unlikely to succeed, so she shouldn't worry about it. But when the girl stretched out her hands to the tree, around her began to hover magical energy. The little girl herself did not expect such a thing. But that was not all. Suddenly, the tree began to sharply increase in size and grow upward. After the plant took its true form, it began to sing loudly that the lyre was behaving proudly and needed a beating. Frank shouted in surprise at what Hannelope had even done, and in parallel told the tree to shut up. Anna wondered if the girl had changed the formula, but then she told herself that she must have, because the true nature of a chatty tree is to sing loudly. The professor kicked it with all his might and ordered it to shut up until he got rid of it, but the tree sang cheerfully that someone seemed to be making too much noise. The assistant pointed out that the new pattern magic was not enough to make a dried-up tree grow and plus also sing. That might only be possible with high-level magic that could alter and augment the formula. The little girl wondered what if she had made it more effective than that, to the point of incomprehension itself. The girl bowed and began to apologize for all of this. After all, she didn't do it on purpose. Apparently, nerves had played their part. Anna asked why she was apologizing, because it is incredible to make changes to the formula without even studying it before. It's a high-level indicator, and the little girl had just freely used level 3 magic. Hannelope was very surprised that she was a child who didn't know anything about magic at all and had just used such a level. The guys immediately started yelling about how this new girl was much cooler than Wooly. She had beaten Fork on all fronts at the first lecture. The boy turned red with anger and began to demand an investigation. It was all obviously a trick. Professor Mennick entered the classroom and noted that the magical skills of the students are much better than he expected, so now it is possible to invite the Emperor to attend the lecture. Robert had long wanted to see how things were done, but the man discouraged him as the students didn't have enough skills. After that, he handed the sheets to Anna and said that this was an assignment that needed to be demonstrated to His Majesty. Let everyone prepare well. The assistant read everything written and confusedly said that they needed to prepare attribute magic. Frank exclaimed that how would they be able to make magic of such a high level? The girl replied that it was necessary to give out mana to everyone, as it should help trigger the magic. After a while, Minnick noticed Hannelope following him down the hall, so he asked what she wanted. The girl asked if she could ask one question from the history lesson that was today. The man tells her to follow him if the little girl is talking about the rebellion. Minnick can't answer her right here. For that, he needs to go to the library and look for the relevant books. He has to rush to the Imperial Palace, so he will just show her where everything is. Already on the spot, the man pointed his hand somewhere to the side and said that the book that Hannelope was interested in was in the history section. After that, he informed her that he had to go. The girl only had time to shout thanks to him. The little girl walked and looked around, marveling at how spacious it was, but all she saw around her were books about animals, if Minnick was wrong. Suddenly, she saw a volume that stood out among all the others and was called The Noble Heritage of the Imperial Family. So the girl decided to take out this book and see what it said. Truthfully, she was a bit surprised why it was in the animal section. Since the book was high, Hannelope, trying to reach it, began to lose her balance and fell forward. Pushing the rack, the little girl accidentally found herself on the other side of it, where the secret section was hidden. The girl realized that it was better not to invade the secret room, but it was too late. After a while, Hannelope guessed that there were important documents in there, but they were all encrypted with passwords. Realizing that she could not read anything, our heroine stretched and began to think that it was already time to go back. But suddenly, a thick folder with some documentation fell on her head. It was a report on the results of the suppression of the rebellion. The little girl decided to try to read what it said. It said that on the 115th day of the rebellion, a plan had been devised to exterminate the rebels, because if the rebellion continued, the damage to the people of the Ardo region would increase. It was also written about the order to refuse to rescue the hostages of the nobles, namely 7 people, including Prince Hart von Reinhardt. Suddenly, the Emperor appeared in the room and asked what she forgot there. Did she secretly sneak in here in order to steal the documents in her hands? After which, he decided to clarify what she was so interested in. Rising from the floor, the little girl asked if Robert regretted leaving his son in captivity. The man sighed heavily and replied that he had made the necessary decision as emperor. Because he could not be the father of one person, he was the father of the whole nation. Therefore, His Majesty does not regret his action. Then he told Hannelope to get out of there. But lastly, he added that her curiosity must have gone somewhere. Hart is not an emperor, so he will always treat her like a father. Falling in her bedroom on the bed, the little girl thought that she was very tired, and today there were too many events, as for the first day at the academy. The hardest thing was to calm down Hart, who misunderstood everything and for some reason decided that Minnick wanted to kidnap her. Suddenly, the little girl remembered that she still needed to do some mana training. It was amazing, but mana training, Bala, was very similar to the training method for treating genetic diseases. One must hold a mana stone in one's hand and do the same things one did every night. Taking it out of her bag, Hannelope noticed a crack that ran through it. It turned out that Wooly had given her not only some old and faded stone, but also a broken one. Then the girl saw a pattern that was drawn on the side and decided to take a closer look at it. But she did not have time to do anything, as the magic object immediately scattered in her hands. After that, the little girl saw on the table pendant, which is not clear how it appeared there. The next day, the girl came to Anna and said that she wanted to give her something. Then she handed her the pendant, which she had accidentally found last night. Taking it in her hands, the assistant asked in surprise where the little girl had gotten it from. Hannelope explained that it came from the stone she'd been given yesterday, and she thought the jewelry belonged to Anna. The girl explained that she accidentally came across it at a stall and it seemed dangerous, so she decided to seal it, but apparently it was mixed with other mana stones. But luckily it was all over, so no need to worry, she would seal it again. The little girl exclaimed that she could be trusted and she would like the girl to be her professor. The assistant replied that it would not be easy, as Professor Frank would not allow it. The girl has been working with him since she was very young, so the other professors won't hire her without his approval. There is one prohibition. You can't poach another teacher's assistant. Recently, a new professor was hired, and Frank recommended another one to replace her. Anna has no say in the matter, but she is grateful to him. The man helped her when she was young, when her family was very sick and her financial situation was dire. Hannelope now understood why the girl was so hesitant around the incompetent Frank, but maybe she could help her. A little later, in magic class, the professor announced that His Majesty was a little late for the open class. So while he was gone, there was time to practice the prepared assignment. Anna stated that the task before the guys is to interact with the given attributes in order to create magic, namely with water, fire, and wind, which is a ring of attributes. They don't necessarily need all of them. Handling one would be enough. The girl then added that it was time to begin and invited Hannelope first to test her powers. Wooly immediately began to carp that she would fail, and the girl would only embarrass herself in front of everyone. When the girl was near the board, Anna began to encourage her and told her to calm down and not to be nervous. The little girl thought to herself that she would only make a small ring since she can't waste the mana that protects her heart. But suddenly the circle of fire increased in size, and Hannelope herself didn't realize how it happened. Everyone present was shocked and immediately started discussing that it was unbelievable and she was much cooler than Wooly. Fork immediately shouted that it was impossible. The girl is obviously using some kind of magic tool to create magic. After all, it's impossible to train mana with a broken stone. Hannelope exclaimed that he had given her a damaged stone on purpose, and the color of the stone was also strange if the boy was so afraid of losing to her. The kid shouted for her to shut her mouth as no one dared to think he was a weakling, after which he displayed the same fiery attribute and solemnly declared that he could do the same. But the situation was starting to get out of control. Frank shouted for the boy to immediately stop it all, but the boy did not succeed. The professor began to get nervous that the fire might spread throughout the class. The assistant tried to calm Fork down in order to get him under control, but again, nothing worked. Hannelope then used the water attribute and instantly put out the fire before it could grow. She then exclaimed reproachfully that the Emperor would be coming here soon. What would happen if Wooly put him in such danger? Anna exclaimed that, in addition to the various attributes, the girl still turns out to be able to use continuous magic. It's just incredible, but how does she manage it all? Because it's already the magic of the fifth circle. Hannelope replied that she doesn't do anything special. Everything happens by itself. Suddenly, a knight in heavy armor appeared in the audience, and everyone looked at him in surprise. When the helmet was removed, the boys saw the Emperor, who stated that of course he knew Hannelope was talented, but he didn't expect her to have fifth circle magic. At least not at the moment. Frank asked in surprise why His Majesty had changed into a knight. The man explained that he didn't draw the children's attention to himself that way. If he were himself, they would all be nervous to follow his instructions, but as it was, he enjoyed the spectacle. But Wooly's abilities are very different from what the professor had told him. The boy doesn't know how to control his magic at all. The teacher immediately stood up for him and said that his power was just over the edge, and so he would not lose even to Abel herself. The Emperor said that in that case he would like to shake hands with such a great student. When the boy replied that he would be honored and stretched his hand forward, Robert abruptly grabbed it and saw the bracelet on his wrist. Showing it to Frank, the Emperor asked if he knew what it was, but the man was so confused he couldn't even find something to say. Robert answered instead, saying that of course he knew, because it was a magic bracelet of the elemental magic type that his dynasty traded with. With the help of this jewelry, even a complete fool is able to use strong magic. If one makes a mistake and is not careful with it, the item can get out of control and become a devastating weapon that is hard to stop. For this reason, Robert banned its distribution throughout the empire. The man is angry and says that Frank thought he could fool His Majesty and get away with it. He couldn't believe his eyes that the Imperial Academy was using such a nasty thing. Then he added that from now on, the professor was dismissed from his position and Wooly was expelled from the academy. A little later, walking down the corridor, Mennick noted that Robert was so genuinely pleased. The man replied that how could one not be happy to have driven away those who had long been eyesores? The guy said that he'd already begun to worry that the matter couldn't be resolved as it was impossible to find proof, but thanks to Hannelope, everything had gone just perfectly. Robert confirmed that she was an amazing kid because she always helped him when needed. Mennick remarked to himself that he didn't think a man who was so heartless to his own children could make such a good-natured facial expression. With the arrival of this little girl, a lot had changed. The young man remembered that terrible day during the rebellion when Hart had told him to run away while he himself would be the bait, and he thought that someday he would have a chance to repay the prince in kind. Suddenly, Hannelope appeared in the corridor, shouting to His Majesty that she had a favor to ask. Taking Anna by the hand, the little girl asked him to appoint Assistant Richter as the new professor. After all, without that, she too would have to leave the academy following Frank. However, she has the best teaching skills and is one of the few who supports children and really tries to teach them something. His Majesty agreed, but said that he had one condition. The man looked at Hanalope and said that from today she should not address him as His Majesty, but call him grandfather. Then he turned to Anna and said that he always knew she was talented, so she could take Frank's place without any problems. When the Emperor left, the girl sat down to the little girl and thanked her for what she had done for her, but then sadly added that she had one student to tutor, and now he would have to be left behind. The girl replied that she shouldn't worry so much about it and began to whisper something in her ear. A little later, when our heroine returned home, she saw the same pendant on the table which she found yesterday, but gave it to Anna this morning, so she did not understand how it was here again. Suddenly it jumped up, and there was a voice saying that he had been disturbed and woken up, then added that he had been asleep for less than 200 years, and he really didn't like it. Turning his attention to Hanlope, the pendant reported that he was glad to see that she was part of the Ko dynasty. The little girl was surprised that he knew their lineage. The voice informed her that it would answer any questions that interested her, but first let her try to guess who he was. The girl replied that how would she know, since all the girl could do was read the pop-up notifications. The creature resented that, actually. He has a linker, so let her not stand with her arms at her sides and try to analyze on her own. Also, she got a clue. The little girl noted that she could feel her mana in this pendant. Could it be that she was affecting it that way? The little girl started trying to guess its name and started making guesses ranging from dummy to rabbit. Pendant got angry and began to lament that how could Mr. Rabbit be called that? After all, people used to fall at his feet, and now he couldn't believe things had changed so much after years of being sealed up. Hanalope quickly corrected herself and called him by his proper name. The creature immediately calmed down and said that it was certainly not perfect, but much better than previous versions. Our heroine said that she remembered exactly how she had given the pendant to Anna Richter, so how it had ended up back in her bedroom. Mr. Rabbit replied that it was her power that brought the linker here. The pendant or linker responds to special powers, and she is the holder of it. At the moment, the rabbit is sealed and can't use all her powers, but she would be able to use her powers thanks to the special person. Mr. can't take it anymore in this state, so he offers the girl to be her representative. Hanalope had a flicker of a thought that she thought that was what she thought, that he needed something from her. The little girl smiled sweetly and said that in that case she was inviting him into the suitcase she kept open. Pendant replied that he was glad they had come to an agreement, so he quickly ducked into the box without a backward thought. Closing it tightly, the girl thought to herself that, did this creature really think that Hanalope would go to such danger? She would return it to Professor Richter again tomorrow. The next day, the girl walked on the territory of the Imperial Academy and thought about the fact that the lecture today will take place outside, so it is necessary to find Anna sooner. But suddenly in front of her appeared twin brother Catherine, and the girl asked if he wanted to tell her something. The boy replied that he did not need anything from her. He just wanted to say that the little girl, beautiful. Then he asked if he could not talk to her. The girl was confused at first, but then replied that of course she could. She thought to herself that the boy reminded her of someone. Then there was a loud voice of Catherine, who called our heroine by name and asked what she was doing there alone. The girl did not understand why her friend said that she was here by herself, but turning around she realized that the boy had disappeared. Hanalope immediately started telling her that she had just talked to her male counterpart. Catherine did not get into her inarticulate story, so she told her that they had to hurry because Professor Richter's new assistant had arrived. From afar, the little girl saw the silhouette of a boy and could not realize who it was. But when he turned around, Hanalope recognized Brentley, who told her that they had not seen each other for a long time. Our heroine was very happy at the sight of him and said that she missed him very much, after which she asked him how things were going for him. The boy replied that he was doing well. Thanks to the bracelet that the girl gave him, he was able to learn magic from Professor Richter. He then asked if she had told Anna to help him get into this academy. But without waiting for an answer, he took her hands and told her that he really wanted to see her again. Hanalope patted him on the head and said that he had grown so much in all the time they hadn't seen each other. Brantley was angry that she had ruined such a moment, but he didn't bother explaining anything to her. Instead, he asked if she had heard about the Day of the Blessing. The little girl replied that she hadn't. According to one legend, the first humans didn't live very long. The reason was sacred poisoning. This world was filled with divine energy that was emitted by the gods, but unfortunately, the weak human body could not resist it. Among the 5 gods ruling the entire world, Frashi was the only one who really cared about humans. He started a great war and sealed all the demons. Also, he blessed people so that supernatural forces would no longer harm them. In other words, this is the day when the religious society demonstrates its power. According to the Emperor's order, the students of the Academy will be sent there as a representative delegation. Several students have been selected, including Hannelope and Brentley. The girl was surprised that Academy students would be sent to the temple's events. Apparently at the expense of attracting students, Robert wants to elevate the importance of magic over divine power. A while later, our heroes arrived at the sacred temple for the Day of Blessing. Hannelope was surprised that there were so many people around. The boy said that on this day everything was different. Then, the girl heard the indignant voice of Catherine behind her, who did not understand why there was so much noise. Next to her was the same boy who told her that she was beautiful, but what was he doing next to her friend? The kid said it was amazing that Catherine had friends. A classmate immediately screamed that how dare Fritz Spiegent talk to her friend. Hannelope finally realized why his face seemed so familiar. They were twins. Hugging Hannelope, Catherine said that unlike him, she has what is called sociability, so let him get out of here quickly. Fritz replied that he didn't want to, and what she got to do with it. He's interested in Hannelope. Brantley immediately stood in front of the girls, covering them with himself, and Spigen irritably asked who he was. Catherine suggested leaving the two to sort things out between themselves and to go on their own. Our heroine did not argue with her. The little girl was so confused that she did not look straight in front of her and sliced into someone. Clutching her head, Hannelope apologized for her clumsiness. The young man replied that it was crowded today, so let them be careful not to hurt themselves. Whereupon the young man wished her a good blessing day and went on his way. Catherine wondered why this is suddenly he behaved so strangely. Usually the guy is not so kind. Our heroine asked who he was. A classmate explained that this is the Marquis of Fork, who is the father of Wooly. The twin thought that the man will be very angry when he sees Hannelope, but for some reason, then he behaved completely differently. Meanwhile, one of the abbots of the temple said that Asta was about to tell everyone about the oracle that had been sent by the god Fraki. The saint went up to the podium and began to unfold a scroll to tell the story. Abel began to read out the words of Frasi that those who are careless of their faith will be punished, and those who disrespect the messengers of God will pay the price. He blesses everyone and helps to open their eyes to it. To worship God is to obey his representative. The price of such obedience will be blessing and abundance. The little girl was surprised because the language of God that Abel read could be understood by her, but what the saint said was different from what was actually written there. It said that when Fraki had blessed everyone, a dying man would come who would carry what need not be held in his despicable body. It is necessary to give it to him, and then he will turn a blind eye to the foolish antics of this man. If he fails, he will pay the price of his return. That's what God Abel was really saying, that she must pay the price of her return sooner or later. The little girl wondered why she suddenly began to understand God's language. Suddenly, Mr. Rabbit appeared in front of the girl and asked, what? Did she really think that all the past deception would get away with so easily? Hannelope could not understand how it kept coming back, for she was giving it to Professor Richter again. Could it be that this jewel was cursed? Then the rabbit told her that he was very glad that now Hannelope could understand the language of God, and it was all thanks to him. She might need the mister someday, so don't throw it away. The last thing he would advise now was to follow the saint. The girl was confused as to why she should follow her, but decided to listen. Meanwhile, Emperor Robert and Prince Hart von Reinhardt appeared outside the temple. His Holiness bowed and said that he was pleased to meet His Majesty. After Robert said that he was a bit delayed, the old man offered to escort the man to his seat. Some people immediately began to wonder that he had come accompanied by Prince Hart, which meant that the rumors that their relationship had improved were true. Apparently, the appearance of the princess had warmed things up between them. Asta was pissed off, so she decided to leave as she realized that once again this smiling face was interfering with her plans. The girl went straight to the small house that was located near the temple. There she went to a huge chest which contained the tribute, separately prepared by the imperial family. Taking out a vial with some kind of liquid, the maiden resented to herself that how could they afford to try to use magic in the main temple? Now, she simply had no other choice. Then she started pouring the substance on the corn and saying that it was a punishment for neglecting the saint. After that, with the use of mana, the corn would instantly rot. Let them all experience humiliation the way she had felt it more than once. A little later, Professor Mennick informed the children that it was time for them to demonstrate their magic for growth on the vegetables donated by the Emperor. No need to be nervous, let them just do what they practiced earlier. All the kids stood silent except for Hanelope, who cheerfully replied that they understood. The little girl thought to herself that if she grew the corn to a large size with magic, it could replace the role of divine power. The abbot said that Abel would start by making a sacrifice to the god of Fraki. Asta crouched near the chest and opened it to perform the ritual. Seeing that there was corn in there, the locals whispered that it wasn't too poor for a tribute. Had they really only cooked it? Abel immediately exclaimed that even unsightly things are precious to God, then stated that he wished to add her sincerity to it and share it with the people. By this is meant her holy power. Hanelope noted that everything was as the Emperor had planned. So where had the information leaked out to her? The girl leaned over the chest and said that now she would demonstrate to everyone the power of the god himself.